Welcome to Dracula Harry. Today's adventure. What if the Mikaelson family found Harry and Klaus adopted him as the first hybrid wizard? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The cupboard under the stairs. The fog over Privet Drive came in low that November. The sort that smelled of coal and wet hedge, and the particular English damp that ran fingers through a man's overcoat regardless of whether the man was alive or had been pretending at it for several centuries. Two men walked the pavement in that fog. Two men who were not, strictly speaking, men. They moved unhurried because the older of the two refused to hurry in any city where he was not actively being shot at, and the younger refused to hurry because he had decided, somewhere between Marseille and the Channel, that boredom was beneath him. You said, Klaus murmured, that this would be an evening of unremarkable carnage. I said, Elijah answered, adjusting one cufflink with the patient care of a man for whom cufflinks were a moral position, that it would be brief. Brief and unremarkable are sister virtues, brother. They are not. Brief is a quality of time, unremarkable is a confession. Klaus laughed once low. The sound did not reach his eyes. His eyes were already at the end of the road, 2 doors down, where a single window glowed yellow at the front of a stout pebble-semi-detached, and where, by the smell carried on the fog, a great many small unpleasant things had been happening in cellars under tidy gardens for rather longer than the neighbors realized. How many? Klaus asked. At this property 1, possibly 2. The whisper on the dock suggested a cell of 4 operating across the south of London, feeding on what the wizards call orphans of the war. Wizards? Klaus drew the word out, tasting it. He had crossed a great many of them in 9 centuries and respected perhaps 3. Mikel is 200 miles north of here by my last count. Less by mine, then we shall make this brief and unremarkable. The fog moved aside for them without seeming to know it had. Number 3 Privet Drive bled noise from the front room, the canned bray of a television, a woman's laugh sharp as broken china, a man's cough that was rough with too much pork and too little air. Number 4 was darker, quieter, and pretended very hard to be ordinary. It was the wrong shade of ordinary. It was the shade ordinary turned when ordinary had something nested in it. Klaus stopped at the gate. He stood and listened. Elijah stood and watched him listen. Inside, in some room beyond the hallway, something with a wet appetite was eating. The sound of it was not loud, it was very small in fact. The sound a fly makes in a glass jar. 2, Klaus said. 2, vampire, not one of ours, newer Eastern stock. And the second, Klaus tilted his head, the fog stirred. Something else, something I do not recognize. That is unusual, Elijah said, for you. The door was on a Yale lock. Klaus did not break it. Breaking doors was loud, and there were neighbors. And a man with as many enemies as Klaus did not announce himself unless he intended for the announcement to be the last sound the building heard. He turned the lock with 2 fingers and a flick. The door opened. The smell that came out was a story. Elijah's nostrils flared once. Klaus did not bother to flare anything. He stepped inside. The hallway of number 4 was a museum of mediocrity. Brown carpet, a coat rack that had at one time been varnished and would never be varnished again. A framed photograph on the wall of 3 people, a sweating man, a horse-jawed woman, a child, the rough shape and color of a swollen boiled ham. None of the 3 were the source of the smell. The smell came from beneath the staircase. It was not just blood. Klaus had grown up with the blood of stags and the blood of hearts and the blood of his own father's tenants when his father had gone hunting, and he had spent 9 centuries finding nothing in any kitchen or any battlefield or any dockside abattoir of London quite so eloquent on the subject of suffering as a small child kept too long in too small a place. The smell of number 4's understair cupboard was that. It was that and one other thing. The other thing was old magic. A magic so much older than the house around it that the house seemed, for a moment as Klaus stood there breathing it in, to be a piece of paper laid over a wound. Brother, Elijah said softly, and there was something in his voice that did not belong to Elijah. It belonged to a younger man, the man Elijah had been once on a beach in Norway, the first time their mother had shown them what she could do with chalk and salt. Do you feel that? I feel that. Klaus reached for the cupboard door, stopped, reached again. The handle was small and white and stickered by a child's careful hand with a star. He opened it. A boy looked up at him out of the dark. He was 5, or possibly 4. Klaus had been alive long enough that the difference between 4 and 5 in a small malnourished child was not always immediate to his eye. He had black hair that needed a wash and round glasses bound at the bridge with what was either sellotape or hope. He sat on a thin mattress on a thin shelf in a cupboard that smelled of mothballs and old urine and the kind of fear a body produces when fear has been its companion for so long it has become a kind of pet. He had a scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt. And the scar was glowing, not the red of fresh blood, not the silver of starlight. A green, a particular green. A green Klaus had been 1,000 years away from and not once forgotten, because the woman who had made him had used that green to do it. He heard Elijah's intake of breath behind him. It was perhaps the closest a member of their family had come to a gasp in 300 years. "Mother's work," Elijah said. "It is. On a 5-year-old. It is." The boy looked at him. He did not flinch. That more than any of the rest of it made Klaus stop. A 5-year-old who had been kept in a cupboard did not look at a stranger in a long dark coat at his cupboard door and fail to flinch. He should have made some animal sound. He should have curled. He did neither. He looked at Klaus with the very level gray-green attention of someone who had decided some weeks ago that the worst that could happen had a finite ceiling, and that nothing at the cupboard door could exceed the ceiling. "Hello," Klaus said. "Hello," the boy said back. His voice was a sound of a thing thin from disuse. "Are you the inspector?" The Aunt Petunia said the inspector might come and that I shouldn't speak, but I think I may have already spoken. "You have. Yes, I'm sorry. Don't be." Klaus felt beneath the floorboards of him something moved that had been still for 903 years. It moved and it was awful because it was tender. "What's your name, love?" "Harry." Just Harry, the boy thought about this. He thought about it with the gravity of a small barrister consulting his case notes. "Harry Potter, sir. Harry Potter." Klaus tried the name. It tasted like a piece of music played badly in another room. He turned his head a fraction. "Elijah." "I hear it. 2 upstairs." "2 upstairs," Elijah agreed. "Take the woman, I want the man." "Brother, I want the man." Klaus did not look at Elijah when he said it. He kept his eyes on the boy kept his eyes on him. Somewhere in the hallway above them, a vampire who was not one of theirs and a creature Klaus could not yet name moved a single floorboard in the way creatures move floorboards when they have suddenly understood, far too late, that the day's prey has just become someone else's prey entirely. Klaus offered Harry his hand. "Will you wait here, Harry?" he said. "The moment I have a small errand." "Yes, sir, you don't have to call me sir." "What do I call you?" Klaus considered. The fog outside breathed against the front door glass. The Yule of a man with too many names in too many countries spread its small light in him like the first warmth of a fire. "Klaus," he said. "Klaus will do for now." "Klaus," Harry said. He tried it. It came out like a coin found in a coat pocket. "Klaus." "Yes, love, wait." He closed the cupboard. He did not lock it. He stood up. Elijah was already at the stair. "The woman?" Elijah asked. "The woman screams the loudest. You are quieter. And you." "I want the man to live long enough to understand the order of things." Elijah inclined his head once. Then he was gone up the stair in a movement that to a human eye would have looked like an absence of movement and a sudden change of light. Klaus took his coat off. He folded it with the care of a man who had ruined a great many coats in his time and did not propose to ruin this one. He laid it on the banister. He went up the stair. The vampire was in the bedroom at the top. He was thin, 20 when he had died, and he had spent the past hour in the bed of a Surrey housewife who, in his defense, had invited him. He was halfway through the second helping when the door opened and the housewife stopped screaming because she had no neck left to scream with. Elijah caught her on the way down. He set her on the carpet as one might set a fallen letter. He did not look pleased. The vampire saw Klaus in the doorway and made the small mistake of recognizing him. "Klaus, I'd rather you didn't love." The vampire moved for the window. Klaus closed the distance the way water closes a gap. He caught the vampire by the collar in midair. He set him against the wall with the same easy attention a man might use to hang a hat. "Tell me about the cellar." What cellar, please?" "The cellar across town. The one I was supposed to be at tonight. There were 4 of you. You are 3 now. Where do the children come from?" The cellar. They buy them. There's a list of houses, families, places the wizards lose children too and don't notice." Klaus held the vampire there for one long beat. He felt Elijah at his shoulder. "The other 2, he said. Hampstead whapping I'll you won't." He did not wrench. Wrenching was loud. "Well, he compressed." The vampire's neck made a sound like a green stalk in a fist and then made no sound at all, and then there was no vampire, just dust on Klaus's hands, and Klaus brushed his hands once together and went down the hall. The man of the house was in the lounge. He had not heard. He was watching a quiz show. He was the right shape and color of a swollen boiled ham, exactly as the photograph in the hallway had advertised, and he was scratching with a finger at the back of his neck where there was a small spot. He turned when Klaus came in. He started to say something with the easy belligerence of a man who has bullied a household for many years and has forgotten that bullying is an art practiced safely only against the smaller. He did not finish the sentence. He was not the worst thing Klaus killed that century. He was not even the worst thing Klaus killed that month. But there was something, Klaus noted it later in New Orleans in a quiet hour with a glass, there was something in the way the man's eyes had gone bright with confusion right before they had gone dark, that Klaus, against his own preference, remembered. Elijah was already at the bottom of the stair when Klaus came down. "The cellar?" Elijah asked. "It is not in this house. I should think not. It is in this city, however. Tomorrow." Klaus put his coat back on. He smoothed the lapels. Brother, Elijah said, the thing on his forehead. Yes, that is not a curse a wizard set, that is a curse our mother set. Yes. And you understand, Elijah said, in the tone of a man who has lived a long life with his brother and is not about to permit a thing to be merely felt when it might also be named, that if you take him, I am taking him. That if you take him, brother, you take him for 9 centuries, not for an afternoon. Klaus stood very still in the brown hallway with his hand on the cupboard door. He thought about a great many things. He thought about a yellow-haired sister and a mother who had not deserved the title, and a father, a particular father who was even now 200 miles north or possibly less. He thought about the words he had said to a portrait once in a manor outside Paris, the year his second-born had been buried in a grave that had no body in it. He had said, I shall not want it again. Wanting is a wound my brother's and I cannot afford. He had lied. He had been lying for 200 years. Brother, Elijah said more softly, I am taking him. Elijah nodded once. Then I shall make the arrangements, Elijah said. You shall need a passport. He shall need a passport. We shall need a story for a boy whose mother left a mark of our mother's making on his skin. We shall need a ship, or this being the 86th year of the 20th century, an aeroplane. We shall need a house. The compound has been shut since the influenza. It can be opened. Open it. You wish to go home. I wish my son to have a home. The word came out before Klaus could examine it. It hung in the brown air of the hallway. Elijah, who was a man who never raised an eyebrow because the muscle was beneath his dignity, did not raise an eyebrow. Then it is done, Elijah said. Klaus opened the cupboard. The boy looked up at him. He had not moved. He had been counting, perhaps. He had been doing whatever it is small children do in a dark place while a man they have just met goes upstairs to set affairs in order. Klaus, he said. Harry, are we going somewhere? Yes, love. Where? Klaus considered. The fog beyond the front door curled. Somewhere in another room a television was still playing a quiz show and would in 11 minutes be turned off by a small unseen friend of Elijah's who had a tidy soul. Somewhere 200 miles or less to the north, a man Klaus had been running from for 900 years was reading a folded telegram. Somewhere across an ocean, an iron gate set in a wall of magnolia and brick stood waiting for a key to turn in it. Home, Klaus said. I don't have a home, sir. You do now. He held out his hand. The boy looked at the hand, he looked at the man, he looked at the man's coat, he looked at the man's face. He had the very level gray-green attention he had had a quarter hour earlier, but now there was, in the corner of one eye, a wet thing that he very quickly blinked away because, in his short life, he had learned that the wet thing got him locked in for longer. He put his hand in Klaus's. It was a small hand. Klaus had handled many smaller things, the throats of senators, the wrists of mistresses, the hilt of a knife at the throat of a brother he had loved well enough to dagger and not well enough to forgive, and never one heavier. Come, little wolf, Klaus said. He had not chosen the words, they had chosen themselves. He felt Elijah's eyes on him and ignored them. Come, Harry came. They walked out of number 4 Privet Drive into the November fog and did not look back. And a Surrey housewife was found dead in her bed by her mother on a Tuesday. And a Surrey grocer was found dead in his armchair by his sister on a Wednesday. And the boy who had been kept in the cupboard under the stairs at number 4 was already by then in a townhouse in Knightsbridge being measured for the first coat that had ever fit him. And he was already in the gentle and stunned hands of a tailor's wife who had been told only that the boy had been ill. And he was already, though he did not know the word for it yet, being introduced to the concept of breakfast as something one did at a table with napkins in chairs. Eat slowly, Elijah said from the doorway. Yes, sir. You may call me Elijah. Yes, Elijah. The boy struggled with the soft consonants of the name. Elijah, who had not in his memory smiled at any creature smaller than 3 feet tall, smiled and then unsmiled with the speed of a man who has caught himself misremembering his own century. Where is Klaus? Harry asked. Klaus is making travel arrangements. Where are we going? New Orleans. Is that, the boy frowned, working it out behind his round repaired glasses, is that in Wales? It is in Louisiana in the United States of America. You will like it. There are beignets, there are jazz musicians. The houses are painted colors that no Englishman would dream of. Why are we going there? It is our home when we are at home. Are we at home a lot? Elijah considered. He considered the question with the gravity it deserved. We have not been at home in a very long time, he said. We intend to be. The boy ate slowly as instructed. He ate a small dish of porridge with honey, and then a piece of toast which someone had cut with a knife into 2 triangles, and the triangularity of the toast affected him for reasons he could not name, and he ate the toast with great attention, and at the end of the porridge he set the spoon down quietly and said, Elijah. Yes. The cupboard. Is there a cupboard where we are going? Number, are you certain? Yes. The boy turned the toast over in his small fingers, examining the underside of it where butter had melted in a small map. Sometimes, he said, the cupboard came back even when they said it wouldn't. Elijah was quiet for a moment. He went then to one knee at the side of the boy's chair, which was an indignity he had not visited upon his own knees since the reign of King George II. "Harry," he said, "look at me." The boy looked. "There is no cupboard where we are going," Elijah said. "There is no cupboard, and there is no man who will lock you in one, and there is no woman who will pretend not to hear you when you cry, and there is no boy with a broad pink face who will tell you, when you have eaten more than half of an apple, that you have eaten his half. There is none of that. There is a courtyard with a fountain in it. There is a kitchen which produces beignets. There is a balcony from which, if you are very, very small and very quiet, you may sometimes hear the river. There is a piano. My brother plays the piano. He plays it more loudly when he is in a temper, but he plays it well. There is a library. There are 3 older brothers and 1 older sister, and one of them, Call, is going to be exceedingly bad for you in ways you will enjoy, and one of them, Finn, is going to be silent at dinner because Finn is silent at dinner, and one of them, Rebecca, is going to dress you, and I am sorry in advance, and the brother in the long coat who fetched you tonight is the one who has fetched you, and you are his now, Harry Potter, and we, all of us, are yours." The boy looked at him. He looked at him with the very level gray-green attention which had remained intact through all of the night's earlier events, and which had still not produced the wet thing he had blinked away in the cupboard. The wet thing had not, in fact, retreated. It had only waited. "Oh," he said, "it was a very small word. It was a word he had needed in a way since he had been born. He produced it correctly." Elijah, who did not bend the knee even to kings, rose and laid his hand for 1 second on the top of the boy's head and walked out of the kitchen and shut the door behind him and stood in the corridor outside the door for a count of 15, and then went to find his brother, and was, for a count of 15, the older of 2 children at the edge of a great water in Norway, and was, for a count of 15, capable, like all the rest of his brothers and sister, and like his mother before any of them, of weeping. There were 3 days between the kitchen in Knightsbridge and the airfield. 3 days in which a very small boy who had been kept in a cupboard learned that the dining room of a townhouse in SW1 had a fireplace at one end of it, and that a fireplace was permitted to be lit even when no one was cold, and that the chair at the head of the table was kept for the man in the long coat, and that the man in the long coat did not, in fact, mind if the boy sat in it when the man was not in the room. He learned that bread came in shapes other than sliced. He learned that meat came in shapes other than fingers. He learned that a bath was a room one had a bath in, and not, as he had previously understood the word, a steel basin in a kitchen at 6 in the morning into which the woman of the house emptied the kettle and you were given 2 minutes. He learned that doors had handles on the inside. On the second day, Elijah took him to a bookshop on Cecil Court, where Elijah purchased a primer in Latin, a primer in French, a children's atlas of the world with hand-painted plates, and a book about owls which had real feathers stuck to its end papers. Harry held the bag with both hands all the way back to the townhouse and did not put it down even when he ate dinner, because no one had told him to. He carried the bag up the stair to bed. He set it on the bedside table. He woke twice in the night to check that it was still there. It was. On the 3rd day, Klaus came home in the morning with a small smile on his face that suggested that the cellar across town had been attended to, and that the list of houses, families, and places that the wizards lost children to and did not notice had been removed from a particular ledger in a particular East End office in a manner not requiring further consultation. He came home and he set a passport on the hall table, a fresh dark booklet with Harry's photograph in it, taken that morning at a chemist's in Sloane Square, and he said, "We fly tonight," and Harry, who did not yet know what flying was as a verb that applied to people, nodded and went upstairs to fetch his bag of owl-feather books. The flight crossed the Atlantic on the 9th of December. The boy slept for most of it with his head against Klaus's shoulder, and Klaus, who had killed 5 men in airports during the 20th century alone and could not abide the indignity of commercial aviation, did not move that shoulder for 7.5 hours. Elijah sat across the aisle reading the financial section of a Dutch newspaper. A flight attendant offered the boy a small plastic bag of pretzels, and Klaus, without taking his eyes off the small dark head against his shoulder, said, "He will not be eating those," in a tone the attendant did not require to be translated. The pretzels were not offered again. In a borrowed car between the airport and the quarter, Harry watched a country slide past his window that was not raining. He watched it with the level gray-green attention. He watched palms. He watched a bayou. He watched a sign for crawfish. He watched a man on a bicycle with a fish in a bucket. Turned once and said quietly to Klaus, "It is very colorful, sir," and Klaus said Klaus, and Harry said Klaus, and went back to the window. The driver, who was a witch of the tramway who had been told only that Mr. Mikaelson would be returning home with a son, asked no questions, and was paid when she let them out at Royal Street with a gold coin she had not seen the like of in 80 years. By Christmas Day they were home. The compound on Royal Street had been shut for 61 years. It opened with a single key, turned by a single hand, and the courtyard, magnolia, fountain, gallery, balcony, wrought iron, gas lamps, exhaled as a courtyard exhales when it has been holding its breath for a generation. "Welcome home," Klaus said from the gate. The boy at his hand walked in and did not let go. A young woman in a long blue coat was waiting in the courtyard with a small basket of beignets, and she nodded once to Klaus and once to Elijah, and her eyes lit on Harry with the careful neutrality of a woman who had been told in advance only some of what to expect, and she said, "He has a witch's eye." "He has," Elijah said, "his grandmother's. His grandmother on the other side." The young woman set the basket down, "And the rest of him," Klaus said, "is mine, Klaus. All of him is mine, Davina, the witch part too, the witch part especially. He shall need teaching. He shall need a great deal. He shall have it, all of it, the blood, the shadow, the shape." He bent down. He did not bend to one knee, he bent to a half. He took the boy's small chin in his hand, which was a hand that had killed kings and lit fires that had burned cathedrals, and he turned the small face up to him, and the green of his mother's old curse on the forehead caught for an instant the green of Klaus's own eyes, and the courtyard for 1 second was a very old place. "Harry," Klaus said, "we have a great deal to teach you. Are you a quick learner?" "I don't know, sir." Klaus, are you a quick learner?" The boy thought about it. "I learned not to make Aunt Petunia angry. That took 5 years. That's a slow learner, sweetheart." "Yes, we shall fix that," Klaus said, and he smiled. And it was the smile of a man, of an old wolf of the night who had wanted a son for 9 centuries, and had, against every reasonable expectation, found one. A long-legged woman with a glass of champagne already half drunk leaned over the gallery rail above them. "Is that him?" she called down. "Is that my new little brother, Nick? He's tiny, he's filthy." "Davina, the boy is filthy. Where is the bath? Why is no one running a bath, Elijah? Why are you standing there like a coat rack? Run the bath, Rebecca, love," Klaus said without taking his eyes off Harry. "Manners. Manners is a bath, Nick." She came down the stair. She came down the stair the way she came down most stairs, as though the stair were a stage and the room below it an audience and the audience had paid to be there. Harry watched her come with the level gray-green attention. She stopped 2 feet from him. She crouched in her pearls. She put a hand under his chin. "Hello, little ghost," she said. "Hello, what is your name?" "Harry." "Hello, Harry, I am Rebecca. We are going to be very good friends, you and I, and the first thing you must understand about me is that I am almost never wrong about a coat. Klaus, his coat is wrong. His coat was selected this afternoon in Knightsbridge by a tailor's wife of 40 years' experience. It was selected by someone who did not love him. We will correct that tomorrow. Tonight he is having a bath and a story and a piece of king cake even though it is December because it is his first night home and there are no rules on first nights." "That is a rule," Elijah noted. "Then it is the only one." She rose. She took Harry's hand from Klaus's hand gently as one might transfer a small bird from a tree to a windowsill. And she said, "Come along, ghost, the bath is up the stair." And she led him up the gallery and he went. And at the top of the gallery he turned and looked back down once into the courtyard, and Klaus, who had not moved, watched the small figure framed against the magnolia and the lamp and felt again the thing beneath his floorboards stir. There was a small ceremony at the dinner table that night which no one called a ceremony. Davina had laid out gumbo and rice and a baguette and a small dish of pickled peppers and a tall glass of milk for the boy and 3 glasses of red wine for the adults, and they had sat in the dining room at a table laid for 4 because the man at the head of the table had said in passing that he wished there to be 4 chairs at table. The boy ate slowly. He ate the rice. He ate the broth around the rice. He ate one of the small pickled peppers and did not flinch at the heat of it, which Rebecca noted aloud with a satisfaction that suggested she had been preparing to defend his Englishness against any number of culinary slights, and was pleased to be relieved of the duty. He ate the bread, he drank the milk. He did not at any point ask for more because he had not yet learned that more was a thing he was permitted to ask for. Klaus watched him not ask for more, and at the end of the meal, without speaking, ladled a second helping into the boy's bowl, and the boy looked at the second helping for a long moment, and then he picked up the spoon and the second helping disappeared as the first had. "You eat," Klaus said, "like a boy who has not been fed." "I have been fed, sir, Klaus, I shall correct that." After dinner, Rebecca took him out onto the gallery and pointed across the courtyard at the gas lamps and at the magnolia and at the small bronze figure that crowned the fountain, a woman with a fish in one hand and a star in the other, and she said, "That is your great-grandmother, on no side I can prove, but I have decided that she is and so she is," and Harry took this in with the level gray-green attention and accepted it, as he was learning to accept a great many things that evening. "Brother," Elijah said quietly beside Klaus at the rail below, "I know, he will be the first of his kind. I know that too. Vampire blood, born wolf, and mother's witchcraft in the scar. I know, hybrid wizard. Yes, there has not been such a thing, there has not. And you mean to raise him? I mean to raise him. Elijah was quiet. The fountain ran. From above faintly came the sound of bathwater running and a small voice asking with the cautious surprise of a child who has not been permitted hot water in 3 years whether it was supposed to be hot. Then I shall teach him to bow, Elijah said, and you shall teach him to bite. And Rebecca shall teach him to dance. And Kaul shall teach him every wrong thing the world has to offer. He shall enjoy that. He shall. The fountain ran. Brother, Klaus said, and his voice was very quiet now, very different from any voice he had used yet that evening. I shall not be a good father. You shall be the father he has. That is not the same as a good one. It is closer than he has yet known. Klaus did not answer that. The fountain ran. Somewhere upstairs a bath was being judged by a small connoisseur to be hot in a way previously unimagined. By midnight Harry was asleep in a bed that had a quilt on it and a window beside it and no lock anywhere near it. Klaus stood in the doorway and watched him sleep. Klaus did not sleep. Klaus had not slept in any meaningful sense since the Norman conquest. But he stood in the doorway and he watched the small chest rise and fall under the quilt. And he made in the dark a list of things which would happen to anyone who came for the small chest under the quilt. And the list was long and the list was specific, and at the bottom of the list he wrote in his own head in the careful hand he had used as a boy in Norway a single name. His father's name. Sleep well, little wolf, Klaus said very softly. The boy did not wake. The quilt rose. The quilt fell. In the courtyard below, the fountain ran, and the magnolia held its winter buds, and an iron gate that had been shut for 61 years stood open at last to a child who had not asked, even once, to be brought home because he had not yet learned that home was something a child was permitted to ask for. The next morning he would learn to ask. The next morning and every morning after. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Hybrid ere the boy asked for more on the second day. He did not know he had done it. He held up his empty plate without speaking, with the very level gray-green attention. And Davina, who was at the stove, put more onto it without speaking either. And Harry sat back down and ate it, and Klaus, who had been pretending to read the Times-Picayune in the corner of the kitchen for 40 minutes, set the paper aside, folded once down the middle, and went out into the courtyard to stand by the fountain for a count of 30, so that nothing in his face would frighten the boy when he came back in. That was the first day of teaching, although neither the teacher nor the student understood it that way at the time. The second day of teaching was a Wednesday, and the lesson was breath. Klaus took Harry up onto the gallery before dawn when the river was still under fog, and he set the boy at the rail and he stood behind him and he said, "Listen." To what? To everything. The boy listened. The boy was, as it turned out, a fine listener. He had been listening for 5 years in the cupboard, listening for the click of Aunt Petunia's heels and the cough of Uncle Vernon's lungs and the wet thump of Dudley's feet on the stair, and he could hear when prompted the absence of any of those things as keenly as a sailor hears the absence of wind. "What do you hear, love?" "The fountain." "Yes." "A bird." "Yes." "What kind of bird?" "I don't know." "A mockingbird." He has been on that magnolia branch since 5 minutes past 4. His song is in 3 parts and you may notice he repeats them in a different order each time. Mockingbirds are thieves. They steal the songs of other birds and pretend to have written them. We have a respect in this house for thieves who do it well. What else? The boy listened. "Wheels," he said, "on a street. That is St. Anne, yes. A man whistling. Mr. August the baker, he whistles the same air every morning. It is a tune his grandmother sang in Senegal in 1880. He does not know that. He learned it from his mother who learned it from his grandmother. What else?" The boy listened harder. He listened, in fact, harder than he had ever in his life listened, and a small frown appeared on his small face, the kind of frown a small barrister might wear when the case notes had stopped corresponding to the case. There is a thing, yes, across the courtyard. Yes, in a room, yes, it is breathing very slowly. Yes, love, it is not a person, it is not. What is it? That is my brother Kaul, he is asleep. He has been asleep for 196 years. We shall wake him this evening, he has been wanting to meet you. The boy turned and looked up at Klaus. He looked up at him with the level gray-green attention, but there was now something behind the attention that had not been there before. It was not fear. Klaus had been watching him for fear with the carefulness of a man who had been a great cause of it in many other faces, and there was none. There was instead curiosity, a curiosity sharp enough to cut a small finger on. "All right," Harry said, and he turned back to the rail and went on listening. Kaul woke at sundown. Kaul woke the way Kaul did most things, which was loudly. He sat up in the casket which had been set into the wall of the south room behind a tapestry of the Battle of Hastings, and he said, in a voice with 2 centuries of dust in it, "If you have woken me to discuss politics, Nick, I am going back in." Then his eyes adjusted and he saw the small figure standing in the doorway in pajamas patterned with small blue stars, and the small figure regarded him with the level gray-green attention, and Carl, who had killed a great many people across a great many countries in a great many centuries, said hello. Hello, Harry said back. Are you mine? I don't know. Nick, he is mine, Klaus said from the corridor. But I shall lend him out. Excellent, Carl got out of the casket. He was barefoot. He was wearing the trousers and shirt he had been put away in, which were 18th century and somewhat creased. He cracked his neck. He cracked his back. He looked down at the boy. Right then, has Elijah taught you to bow yet? Number good, we shall do it wrong on purpose. That was the beginning of call. The third day of teaching was a Friday and the lesson was speed. Klaus took Harry into the courtyard with a feather, and he set the feather on a stone tile and he said, pick it up before it lands again. Harry, who had not yet had blood, who had not yet had the bite, who at this point was still purely a small wizard child with the green sigils on his forehead and the strange weight of 9 centuries' love pressed into the top of his head, attempted and missed and missed and missed, and on the 4th attempt landed on his backside in the fountain, and Rebecca, watching from the gallery above with a glass of champagne, applauded. Again, Klaus said. Harry got up. He was wet. He did it again. He missed. Again, he did it again. He missed. Again. It took 9 attempts. On the 9th attempt, and Klaus, watching very carefully, saw the small hand learn in a way no human hand could have learned, the path of the feather and the curve of the air around it. Harry caught the feather 2 inches above the tile. Good, Klaus said. The boy looked up at him with the level gray-green attention, and there was in his small wet face the smallest possible adjustment of muscle around the mouth. That was the first time Klaus saw his son smile. He did not say anything about it. He turned instead to Rebecca on the gallery and he said, he is fast, sister, and Rebecca said, of course he is fast, Nick, look at his shoulders, he is your boy, and Klaus, without correcting the pronoun, took Harry inside to dry him off. The 4th day of teaching was a Saturday and the lesson was the witch's tongue. Davina sat Harry on a stool in the kitchen and put before him a small bowl of salt, a small bowl of ash, and a small bowl of water from the bayou, and she said, there are 3 kinds of magic in this town, child. There is the kind the witches teach, there is the kind the dead teach, and there is the kind your mother gave you, which is older than both and which I will not pretend to know. She did not call him by name, she called him child. She would call him by name in 8 months when she had decided he was hers to call by name. We shall start with the kind the witches teach. Put your finger in the salt. He did, now in the ash. He did, now in the water. He did, now say in your mind the word for safe, whatever it is, your own word, not mine, do not tell me, he thought. He thought for a long time. The word he chose was a word that no one had taught him, a word he had constructed in the cupboard out of 3 smaller words and 1 syllable that did not, properly speaking, belong to a language. He held it in his mind. He said it without moving his lips. The water in the bowl moved, the ash darkened, the salt in 3 places along its surface formed 3 small unmistakable lines. Davina looked at the salt for a long time. She did not pick up the bowl, she did not touch the lines. She turned her head and over her shoulder in the direction of the courtyard she said, Nick, come here. Klaus came, he looked at the bowl, he looked at the lines. His mother's people? Klaus asked. I do not think so, Davina said, not the lines I know go this way. She drew in the air above the salt with 1 finger a curve. These go this way, she drew another. These are older, these are the lines I have only ever seen on 1 wall in this city. Which wall? The wall in the basement under St. Louis No. 1, the one no living witch has been permitted to read since 1791. Klaus was quiet for a count of 3. Teach him to read it, he said, he is 5. Teach him, he is 5, Klaus. Teach him in time, in whatever time he requires, you shall have the time. You shall have my house, my money, my books, and any of my brothers and sister you require for the purpose. Teach him. Davina looked at Klaus. She looked at him with the look of a young witch who had been given an instruction by a very old man with green eyes that at that moment were not entirely green. She said, yes, Nick. Thank you. He went out. That was the 4th day of teaching. By the end of the 1st year, Harry could pick a feather out of the air before it landed. He could pronounce 3 words in Old French, and 1 in Old Norse, and 2 in a tongue Davina would not name. He could, when permitted, listen to a room from 2 floors below it and tell you how many hearts were beating in it. He could read 4 books at the level of a clever 10-year-old and 1 book at the level of a 30-year-old historian. He had eaten a beignet for breakfast every Sunday since the 2nd week of his life at the compound, and he ate them now without sugar around the mouth, because Rebecca had, with great patience and 1 cloth napkin, taught him not to. He had a coat that fit. He had 3 coats that fit. He had pajamas. He had a piano lesson on Tuesdays. He had a Latin lesson on Wednesdays. He had a knife. The knife was Carl's gift. It was small and the handle was bone and the blade was 3 inches and clean. Call had given it to him on his 6th birthday, which the household had decided was on the 31st of July because the boy himself remembered no birthday, and Call had said, "A boy does not carry a knife to use it, Harry. A boy carries a knife so that he is not the kind of boy a knife is used on." "Yes," Harry said, "you will use it eventually." "Yes, on someone bigger than you." "Yes. And then you will tell me about it and we shall have a drink, even if you are 7. "All right." Elijah in the doorway said, "Call," in a voice that had been calibrated over 1,000 years for the purpose of saying in 2 letters an entire essay. "Brother," Call said back, smiling, and the matter was closed. By the end of the 2nd year, Harry was a small, fast boy with very neat hair who could not yet in any meaningful sense be hurt by a falling object. Davina had been showing him in the kitchen how to wrap his bones in air. He had got it in his way on the 7th attempt. He stood in the courtyard while Call threw a brick at him from a balcony, and the brick struck him on the shoulder and the brick broke. The shoulder did not. Call whooped. Rebecca on the next balcony said, "Klaus, do not let Call throw bricks at my brother," and Klaus said, "He has a vested interest in the boy not breaking, sister. He shall not throw a brick that the boy cannot survive," and Rebecca said, "That is not a comfort," and Klaus said, "It is the comfort you shall have." The 3rd year was the 1st year of blood. Klaus gave the boy his blood on the morning of his 8th birthday, in the kitchen, before anyone else was awake, before Rebecca had risen and before Davina had come up from her own house on Burgundy. He sat the boy on the counter. He cut his own palm with the boy's bone-handled knife. He said, "This is going to taste like a story you have not been told yet. Drink slowly." Harry drank. He set the cup down. He looked at his own hands, which had begun to itch in a way they had never itched before. He looked at his feet, which felt suddenly heavy and suddenly light at the same time. He looked at Klaus. "It tastes like," he searched, "like a place." "What place?" "I don't know." "That is a fjord, that is a tribe. That is a mother who wished a different thing for her sons than the thing they became, and a father who wished one thing only, and a sister who has always been the best of us. That is a great deal, love. You shall not get it all at once. You shall have to grow into it. And we shall have to be careful, you and I, in the 1st month, because the blood I have given you is going to argue with the witch's blood your mother gave you, and there will be a night or two when one or the other wishes to be louder. We shall manage it together." "Yes, Klaus. Klaus, good. Now go and find Call. He has something to teach you about pickpockets in Jackson Square that I would rather not know I knew." Harry went. The first turn came 2 months later. It came at the full of the August moon in the bayou, in a clearing Klaus had chosen because the trees there were old and the ground was soft, and the witches of the Tremé had set a circle of bones around the perimeter in a pattern Davina had been working on for a fortnight. Klaus was there. Elijah was there. Davina was there. Rebecca, who could not, by her own decision, watch what was about to happen, was in New Orleans at the bar of a hotel, holding the hand of a woman she had not yet decided whether to love or to eat, and listening for the wind to change. Harry was 8. He stood in the middle of the circle. He had taken his shirt off because Klaus had said the shirt would not survive. Had taken his glasses off because Klaus had said the glasses would not survive. He stood there small and bare and very calm, and he looked up at the full moon through the canopy of cypress, and he said, "Klaus." "Yes, son, will it hurt?" "It will hurt a great deal for a very short time, 8 seconds perhaps less if you are good at it. I was not good at it the first time. I screamed for 9 minutes. You shall do better." "All right, I am here, I know. I am not going anywhere. I know." The moon climbed, the bones glowed faintly. Davina chanted in a tongue she had learned at Klaus's instruction over the past 2 years, the words of the binding she had built out of Esther's old lines and her own grandmother's older ones, the words that would let the witch in Harry not fight the wolf in Harry but ride him, the way a small thin rider rides a much bigger horse, by being faster with the reins than the horse is with the hooves. The bones glowed brighter. The boy in the circle gasped once. His back arched. His green eyes went green in a different way. It took 8 seconds. He was good at it. What stood in the circle then in the moonlight was a black wolf the size of a yearling deer, with a green scar still visible on the matted fur of its forehead, and eyes that were not the eyes of any animal that had walked the bayou in any of the centuries Davina's grandmothers had walked it. The wolf looked at Klaus. The wolf was 8 years old. The wolf knew his father. "Good boy," Klaus said. His voice was steadier than at any point in the previous half hour. "Good boy, come." The wolf came. By the end of the 4th year, Harry could turn at will. By the end of the 5th, he could turn at will and pick a feather out of the air on the way. By the end of the 6th, he could read every book on the 2nd shelf of Elijah's library and several on the 3rd. And he had translated Caesar's Gallic Wars at the age of 10 and pronounced of Caesar that he is showing off Elijah. The actual fighting is in the bits between the speeches. And Elijah, who had read the Gallic Wars in the first edition, had said, yes, and made a note in pencil on the inside cover of his own copy of his son's observation. He did not say son, he thought it. By the end of the 7th, by the summer Harry was 11, there were already rumors in the witch courts of the south and the vampire courts of the east and the wolf packs of the bayou that the Mikaelsons had got themselves a wonder. The rumor was wrong only in its modesty. They had got themselves the first of a kind. He was the first hybrid wizard. He was a vampire of the original line, a wolf born to the moon, and a witch with sigils his adopted father's mother had stitched into him before any of them had known what he would be. There had not been such a creature. There would not be another because Esther was dead and the line of her witchcraft was Klaus's alone and Klaus had only one son. The letter came in the Morning Post on the 31st of July. Davina brought it in. She set it on the breakfast table between the orange juice and the king cake. The envelope was thick paper. The ink was emerald. The address read, Mr. H. Potter, The Compound, Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, United States of America, the first-floor bedroom above the courtyard. What in seven hells, Rebecca said, is that? Harry, who had picked it up because no one else seemed inclined to, slid it with his bone-handled knife. He read it. He read it again. He set it down. He picked up his orange juice. It is a school letter, he said, from a school in Britain. What school? Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. There was a long silence in the dining room of the compound. The fountain ran. The mockingbird, who by now had a name and a routine, finished his third verse and started his fourth. From above on the gallery, Call leaned over the rail in his shirt sleeves with a cup of coffee. Well, Call said, that's adorable. They cannot have him, Rebecca said immediately. I have not said I wish to go, Harry said. Have you wished to go? Klaus said, and his voice was very mild. Harry considered. He considered with the level gray-green attention. He thought of the library and of Elijah's voice reading him through the difference between the ablative absolute and the gerundive, and he thought of Davina's bowls of salt and ash and water, and he thought of the wolf in the bayou and the brick on the shoulder and the feather in the air, and he thought of his father's hand on the top of his head at the end of an evening. He thought of the cupboard. He thought of how long ago that had been and how it had not, at any point in any of the years since, returned. He thought of the wizards who had not noticed. I should like, he said, to see what they make of me. Rebecca set her champagne down. Klaus. I heard him, sister. Klaus, he is 11. He was 5 in the cupboard, sister. He shall be 11 at the school. He has aged 8 years among us. He shall be the safest 11-year-old in any castle in Britain. Klaus. He has asked Rebecca. Rebecca was quiet. She turned her glass in her hand. Then he shall go, she said, but there are conditions. Elijah looked up from his newspaper. Sister. Conditions, Rebecca repeated. He goes in our coats. He goes with our coin. He goes with our name on his papers, not the one his mother gave him, which is the name the wizards know. Wizarding Britain knows the name of Mikaelson, Klaus said quietly. It has known the name of Mikaelson since before its goblins built their first bank. We shall not hide the name, we shall use it. He shall enroll as Harry Potter Mikaelson, and the wizards shall make of that what they will, and what they shall make of it is silence. I want a portrait of him in the castle, Rebecca said. What? A portrait of him? I want to look at him. He shall be at school, sister, not at the bottom of a sea. I want a portrait of him in the castle, Nick. Klaus looked at her. He looked at his sister. He looked at his sister's hand, which was not entirely steady on the stem of her glass. He looked at the boy at the end of the table who had picked up the letter again and was reading it with the level gray-green attention for the third time. Elijah, Klaus said. I shall arrange a portrait, Elijah said. Davina shall enchant it. It shall hang in his dormitory. Rebecca shall be able to look at him whenever she chooses, which we shall pray in private is not so often as she now thinks. I shall look at him as often as I wish, Elijah. You shall, sister. The compound made arrangements, as it had made arrangements once before, on a London evening 5 years earlier. There were robes, ordered from a tailor in Diagon Alley who did not know who his client was, and was paid in gold he had never seen the like of. There was a wand from Mr. Ollivander, an interesting wand, holly and phoenix feather, that selected Harry with a flick that made the floor of the shop hum and Mr. Ollivander step back and say, very quietly, curious indeed, in a voice that suggested that he had not in his long career seen a child like the one in his shop, and was uncertain whether what he had seen was the kind of thing one wrote down. There was a trunk. There was an owl, a snowy female who declined to be named anything sensible and was therefore named Hedwig, after a German queen of the 12th century whom Klaus had once danced with at her wedding. There was a piece of king cake at midnight on the last night by the fountain that the boy ate without sugar around the mouth in the manner Rebecca had taught him while the moon rose over the magnolia. Are you afraid? Klaus asked beside him. Number, are you certain? I am with you, Harry said simply. And I shall be at a school. The two facts are different, they are not opposite. Klaus looked at him. The boy was 11. He was small for his age, but he was no longer small in the way he had been when Klaus had opened a cupboard door in Surrey. He stood like a boy who had been listened to. He spoke like a boy who had been read to. He had a knife in his coat that Klaus had given him, and a Latin primer in his trunk that Elijah had given him, and a brooch in the shape of a feather pinned to the inside of his collar that Rebecca had given him, and a small bottle of his father's blood in a stopper in his pocket that no one had told him to take but that he had taken anyway because he understood by now the way the household worked. "You shall write," Klaus said, "every Sunday. Twice on Sundays. Twice on Sundays. And if anything, son, should occur which you do not know what to do with, I shall call you. You shall call me, and the family. "All right," Harry said. He took the last bite of king cake. He looked up at the moon. He looked then up at his father. "Father." Klaus did not answer for a count of 2. He had wanted for a great many of the 7 years since he had opened the cupboard to be addressed in that way. He had not asked for it. He had thought in his more honest hours that he ought not to have asked for it, because a son's word was not a word a father had any right to compel. "Son," he said back, "I shall be all right. I know it, Harry, but it shall not stop me checking. I shall send Elijah, I shall send Klaus, I shall send myself. If the school is foolish, I shall remove you. If the school is interesting, I shall fund it. If the school is brave enough to attempt to keep me from you, I shall keep something of theirs in return for as long as it pleases me to keep. Yes, you are mine, son. Yes, they are mine because they have you. They do not know it yet. They shall learn." The boy nodded once. The fountain ran. From the gallery above, faintly, Rebecca was singing, with a slight slur, an old French song to Davina, who was teaching her the descant. From the kitchen, faintly, came Klaus stealing a beignet, and Elijah in passing telling him not to. From the river, faintly, came the long mournful horn of a steamboat that did not, properly speaking, exist any longer except on certain nights when Davina's grandmothers chose to hear it. The next morning, a boy with very neat hair and round repaired glasses and a snowy owl in a cage and a knife in his coat, and a phoenix feather wand in his trunk left the compound on Royal Street, with his father walking him to the door and his 3 other parents, for so the boy had come to think of Elijah and Rebecca and Klaus gathered at the gate. He did not look back from the car. He did not need to. He had not in 7 years lost the courtyard out of the corner of his eye, even when he could not see it. He carried it. The courtyard was in him now in the way the cupboard had been in him once, and he was bringing it at last to a country that had not been kind to him, and that would shortly in its slow, polite way learn what it had given up. There were other lessons in the 7 years which the boy would remember later as the 7 years he had been a boy. He would remember the afternoon Elijah taught him, in the courtyard, the difference between a bow that meant respect and a bow that meant pity, and which to give to a king and which to give to a man who only thought he was a king. He would remember the night Klaus took him out across the Pontchartrain in a stolen boat and showed him the way the moonlight ran in lines on the water, the way the witches had once read those lines as one might read a page, the way Klaus himself had been reading them, with mixed success, since the 1730s. He would remember the September afternoon when Rebecca, on the carpet of her dressing room, had set the boy down between her knees and combed his hair with a brush of tortoiseshell and taught him to part it on the left, and had said very quietly to the top of his head, "There is a manner of standing in a room, little ghost, which lets the room know you are there but does not require the room to apologize to you. We shall practice it. It is the manner one wears at funerals and at weddings and when one is in court. You shall be in court someday. We are all of us in court eventually." He would remember the morning Davina had taken him into the basement under St. Louis No. 1, with permission Klaus had purchased in a manner Davina did not inquire into, and had set his palm against the wall the witches of New Orleans had not let a witch read since 1791. He would remember how the lines had moved under his palm, how they had not glowed for Davina, how they had glowed for him. How Davina had said in a tone he had not before heard her use, "Child, we shall not tell anyone in this city what we have just seen. We shall not tell anyone in any city. Your father may know, your uncles may know, your aunt may know. The wizards over the sea may never know, because if they knew they would do a thing to you about it that we should then have to do a thing about in return, and that is not a thing I wish to do this year or next. Yes, Davina, good child, Davina, yes." What did the wall say? Davina was quiet for a long moment. The lamp she had brought with her flickered. She had set in advance 3 sigils of her own on the 4 walls, so that no listener in any plane would be permitted to overhear what passed between them at this moment. "It said your name," she answered. "The name your mother gave you, and it said it was glad to see you. And it told me in a manner I am not going to translate for you what you are. I have known what you are since you came into Klaus's kitchen at 5 years old. I have not until this morning known what you are for. The wall has now told me. The wall says you are for many things, child. I shall not tell you all of them today. I shall tell you one of them today because it is a useful one. The wall says you cannot, properly speaking, be killed by anything that is not older than you. Do you understand? Number, then I shall explain it again when you are 12. For now, you are safe from a great many things you do not yet know to be afraid of. You are not safe from your father's father. You are not safe from a wand that was made from the same wood as a wand that struck the night you were marked. You are not safe from a betrayal by someone you love. We shall work on those. Come up the stair. He went up the stair. He held the lamp for her. He did not, for the rest of his life, forget what the wall under the cathedral had said in a tongue he had not, at age 10, been formally taught, and yet had understood. In the manner he had understood the second word of the witch's ritual and the 8th word of Elijah's bow, and the 3rd word in the song Mr. August the baker had whistled on a Tuesday morning from his grandmother in Senegal. The manner of a boy who had been raised very thoroughly to listen. The night before he left for Britain, Klaus took him out to the gallery a final time. The river was loud that night. The mockingbird was silent for once because he had finished his evening repertoire by 10. The compound around them was lit in its small, careful lamps. The magnolia in midsummer was past its bloom. The wrought iron rail under Harry's hand had been polished that morning by Davina herself, who had said only his last night and would brook no help. Are you ready, son? Yes. Do you know what you are? You have told me. Tell me back. The boy looked out at the river. He had grown 2 inches in the past year. The hair on the top of his head had darkened, the way wolf fur darkens around the second turn, but it was still his hair. The scar on his forehead was paler than it had been once, though Davina would have said and would say if asked at any later date that the sigils Esther had sewn into it had not faded, they had only learned to be quiet. I am a wolf, Harry said. I am of your blood, I am a witch, I am a wizard, I am 11. You forgot one. What? Yours? Harry looked up at him. He looked at Klaus with the level gray-green attention. I am yours, he said, and ours. And yours and ours. Yes. The river ran. From below them faintly came Call's voice in the courtyard, in a quarrel with Rebecca about a hat. From the kitchen faintly came Elijah making coffee. From the gate faintly came the small click of Davina turning the lock for the night. Klaus. Yes, if I am wrong about going, then we shall come and get you, son, the whole of us, in our coats. The school shall not survive the experience. All right, sleep well, little wolf. Sleep well, father. The boy went in. Klaus stayed at the rail a while longer. He stood there in the soft warmth of a New Orleans summer night, and he thought about a hallway in Surrey and a hand in his own hand, and the green of a curse on a small forehead. And he thought about his own father, who was no longer the closest threat in the world to the boy upstairs, but who would eventually come because that was what his own father did. He thought about a great many years and how few they had been against the count of his life, and how heavy they had been against the same count. He thought for the first time in 903 years about being grateful. He did not name the thing. He was a man who did not, by long practice, name what he felt. He let it stand there in the dark of him in its own shape. In the morning the boy left for Britain. The owl in her cage was indignant about the heat. The trunk was heavier than anyone but Klaus could lift. Elijah carried it anyway because he liked, on certain mornings, to perform a service his speed permitted him that his dignity ought to have forbidden. And Klaus did not comment, and Rebecca pretended not to notice. And Call made a great show of bowing to the trunk as it passed, and Davina put a sprig of rosemary in the boy's coat pocket without speaking. And the gate of the compound closed behind them with the same small iron Syed had made on Christmas Day 7.5 years before. Hogwarts on the other side of an ocean did not know yet what was coming. The Sorting Hat had not heard the news. The portraits had not been alerted. The headmaster at his desk was annotating in his neat slanted hand a letter from the ministry about staffing. He set the letter aside. He picked up a fresh sheet of parchment. He wrote at the top the date. He began a letter to the parents of the incoming class, as he did every year on the morning of the 1st of September, and he did not yet know that he would, before the day was out, be drafting a second letter on a different matter to a household on Royal Street whose name had not appeared on any ministry register in 140 years, and which would, when it appeared, cause 3 undersecretaries in 3 separate offices in 3 separate corridors of Whitehall to set down their teacups very carefully. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Stain on the Turbot. King's Cross Station in the first week of September was an experience designed, evidently, for people other than the family on platform 9 3/4 that morning. The mortar of the pillar at the platform's entrance still hummed where Klaus had passed it. The trolley boys gave the family a wide berth. A pair of Hogwarts prefects who had been chatting near the train fell into a silence that they did not quite understand, and could not have explained except that the silence was a polite one, of the sort one gave at funerals or when one had not been formally introduced. Klaus, in a long charcoal coat with his hand on the back of Harry's neck, surveyed the platform with the patience of a landlord surveying an inn he had not visited in some decades. Elijah, beside him, with one hand in his trouser pocket and the other holding the leather strap of Harry's trunk on its trolley, surveyed it with the patience of a barrister considering whether the inn was up to code. Rebecca, in a dove-gray coat that no woman in the station was wearing well enough to forgive, surveyed the boys her own age and dismissed them, one after the other, in increments of half a second. Call had not come. Call had said the night before, "I shall not come to King's Cross because if I see a single English child snubbing my nephew I shall have to eat the child, Nick, and you have specifically told me not to eat any English children this autumn." And Klaus had said, "I have indeed," and Call had stayed home. "You shall write," Klaus said, "every Sunday, twice on Sundays, twice on Sundays. Hedwig knows the way. Yes, should anything occur which I shall call. Good." Across the platform, a tall red-haired family were saying loud goodbyes to one another. The kind of goodbye that is, in part, theater for the other families on the platform. The smallest of the boys, the one Rebecca was already, against her own will, beginning to like for the freckles, was looking openly across at the small family in the dark coats with the dignified expression of a boy who had been raised to know better than to stare and was failing to remember the lesson at this exact moment. The boy's mother caught him at it. She slapped his arm. She herded him toward the train. "Look at the small one stare," Rebecca murmured to her brothers in French. "He is not staring at you, sister. He is staring at us, Nick. That is more grave. He shall recover, they all do." Harry, who had heard them, looked across the platform once at the red-haired boy. The boy met his eye and froze the way a small animal freezes when it has been seen by something on the wrong end of the food chain. Harry, who had been a small animal in a cupboard once and remembered the freeze, did the kindest thing he could think of. He raised a hand and waved briefly with the very slight smile he had begun since his 8th birthday to permit himself when he wished to be merciful. The red-haired boy unfroze. He waved back with an expression of unutterable confusion and was towed onto the train by his mother. "That," Rebecca said, "is the boy who shall come to a sticky end." "That," Klaus said, "is the boy who shall be the first friend my son has at this school, sister, unless you continue to call him Sticky in front of him." "How can you know?" "Because my son just waved at him. My son does not wave." "Your son did not use to wave." "Yes, we shall see what other things he begins to do now that he is among children of his approximate age for the first time. It shall be useful intelligence." Klaus turned to Harry. He went then to one knee at the side of the trolley, which was an indignity he had not visited on his own knees since the reign of King George II either, and Elijah beside him noted this with no expression at all because he had been waiting for it. Klaus took his son's small chin in his hand. "Listen to me, love. The teachers shall pretend not to be afraid of you. 2 of them shall fail. The headmaster shall be charming at you. He is good at it. Be charming back. He likes that game. There is a potions master who was a small angry boy once who shall recognize what you smell of within 10 seconds of you entering his classroom. Do not lie to him. Do not flatter him. Greet him correctly. He shall not give you trouble. He may even in time be of use. There is a man with a turban. We have not yet identified what is in the turban. You shall identify it. You shall write to me about it before you do anything else. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good, now go." The boy went. He turned at the carriage door. He raised one hand. He did not wave. He held it up to his family for 2 seconds, palm out, which was a gesture Davina had taught him in the summer between his 9th and 10th years, a gesture which meant, in the witch tongue, "I see you and I shall hold the sight and carry it." Klaus raised his hand back. Elijah inclined his head. Rebecca blew a kiss with the wrist she would later, in her bedroom in the Knightsbridge townhouse, use to wipe her eye and pretend it had been only an itch. The train left. In a compartment in the middle of the train, 2 minutes after the train left, the carriage door slid open and a red-haired boy stood there with a smudge of jam already on his nose and said, "Sorry, mate, everywhere else is full, do you mind?" and stopped. He stopped because he had seen who was sitting by the window. He blinked once. He looked briefly like he might apologize and back out. "Sit," Harry said. It was not the voice of an 11-year-old. It was the voice of a small barrister addressing a witness. "There is a sandwich. Davina made too many. Take one." The red-haired boy sat. He took a sandwich. "My name is Ron. I am Harry. I know. Yes, I expected that. Do not be uncomfortable about it." "All right," Ron Weasley chewed. He blinked. He pointed hesitantly at Harry's forehead where the scar in this lighting was very pale. "Is that real?" "Yes, what is it?" "A wedding present in a manner of speaking, from a relation I have not yet met. You shall meet several of my family by Christmas. Be civil to my aunt and you shall have a friend for life. Be uncivil and I shall not be able to help you." Ron Weasley considered the sandwich. He considered the small, dark-haired boy across from him, who was holding a copy of Caesar's Gallic Wars in Latin upside down on his lap, because he was at this point in his life capable of reading Latin in either direction, and who had a snowy owl in a cage on the rack above his head and a knife in his coat pocket, and the very level gray-green attention of someone who had, evidently, spent a portion of his short life among adults of a considerable variety. I shall be civil to your aunt, Ron Weasley said very carefully, if you tell me where your sandwich was made, because it is the best sandwich I have ever had. New Orleans. All right. That was the beginning of Ron. In a compartment 2 carriages down, a young woman with very large hair and a great many books on her lap and a determination to introduce herself to every first year on the train in alphabetical order, opened the door of the compartment 2 carriages down and saw the boy and the red-haired boy and said, "Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost his." And then stopped because she had seen, of all things, the spine of one of the books on Harry's knee, which was a book she had previously believed to exist in only 17 copies and to be held in 3 of them by the British Library. She said, "Is that?" "It is," Harry said. "That is the 1834 edition of Calpurnia Cottingham's Vampiric Etymologies." "Yes, there are 17 copies of that book in the world. 23, the library at home has 6. At home where? New Orleans." She sat without invitation. She set her own pile of books down on the seat. She put her hands on her knees. She said, "May I read it after you? You may read it on the train if you wish. What is your name?" Harry Potter Mikaelson." Hermione Granger went for 2 seconds very still. She had read about the family. She had read about them in a book in a section of the school library at Hogwarts that she had not, technically, been granted access to until her 3rd year, and that she had got into anyway by being polite to the right portrait. She had read about them in a footnote in a book on European wizarding diplomacy. She had read about them in an article in a Bulgarian wizarding periodical that her parents had bought her at an airport on a holiday. The footnotes alone had been enough to keep her awake some nights. Some of the footnotes had been crossed through by the ministry's own pen. "Oh," she said, "yes, I shall be civil to your aunt. Thank you. May I read the book?" "You may." She read the book. She read it through her own first sandwich, which she did not entirely taste, and through Ron's 3rd sandwich, which she also did not entirely taste. And she finished the relevant chapter at Stoke-on-Trent and looked up with the expression of a small, extremely clever person who had been informed of a piece of information that she had previously regarded as theological. Harry, who had been watching her over the top of his Caesar, raised one eyebrow at her in the precise manner Elijah had been teaching him for 2.5 years. "There is," Hermione began, "yes, in the appendix. Yes, it says you cannot exist. It was published in 1834, Hermione. The author had a small sample size. You are joking." "I am. Are you actually joking?" "In a manner of speaking," she laughed. It was a startled laugh. It was the laugh of a girl who had not, in her short life, laughed at very much that was not, strictly speaking, a pun. Ron opposite, who had been watching this exchange with the careful neutrality of a man who did not know all the words but knew when a thing was funny, laughed too with relief. That was the beginning of Hermione. By the time the train rounded the curve of the loch, and the towers of the castle came up out of the trees with their black flags on, the 3 of them had agreed in unspoken terms that they would sit together at meals, and that they would not, by tacit consensus, discuss the 1834 edition of Vampiric Etymologies in public, and that Ron would not, under any circumstances, attempt to make small talk with Rebecca, and that Hermione would, by Christmas, be permitted to write a single carefully worded letter to the library at the compound to request the loan of 2 specific volumes. These agreements would, in the next 7 years, be honored to the letter. The Sorting Hat was not pleased with him. The Sorting Hat had been on the heads of many strange creatures in its long life. It had been on the head of a girl who, 2 centuries before, had turned out to be a swan in human form, and had remained one all 4 of her school years, and had returned to her loch on graduation and never been heard from again. It had been on the head of a boy who had spoken every language ever spoken on earth, including 3 that no longer were, including one that did not, in any human sense, have words. It had been on the head, in the 1840s, of an actual ghost. It had handled all of these in the time allotted, 4 minutes at the outside, and pronounced a house and moved on. It was on Harry's head for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. For the first minute it said nothing at all. The great hall, which had gone silent at the name, stayed silent. In the second minute it said, in Harry's ear, in a voice that was not its usual jovial public voice but a private older voice, "What are you?" "I am Harry." "You are not a Harry. You are several things stacked into a hairy shape. Yes, there is a great deal of wolf in here. Yes, there is a great deal of vampire in here. Yes, there is a curse here I have not seen since 1732. Yes. I cannot sort the wolf, Harry. I cannot sort the vampire. I cannot sort the curse. I can only sort the boy. Show me the boy." The boy thought. He did not think with the level gray-green attention. He thought for the first time in some years with the small, frightened intelligence of a 5-year-old in a cupboard who had been listened to. He thought of Klaus's hand on his shoulder. He thought of Elijah on one knee at the kitchen chair. He thought of Rebecca singing a French song in the courtyard to Davina. He thought of Karl on the Pontchartrain in the moonlight teaching him the lines of the witches. He thought of Davina taking his small palm against the wall under the cathedral. He thought of an iron gate opening for him after 61 years. "There is no boy without them," Harry said. "Then I shall sort you with them in mind." Yes, the hat was quiet for another moment. "You are not a Gryffindor. You are brave, but you do not require the audience. You are not a Hufflepuff. You love a great deal, but the love does not go evenly out. It goes very deep down. You are not a Ravenclaw. You are clever, but you are not in love with cleverness. You are not, strictly speaking, a Slytherin. But you shall have to be a Slytherin because the snakes shall know what you smell of, and the snakes shall recognize their own, and you are the only kind of boy this school has had in 3 centuries who shall walk into the dungeons on the first night and have the dungeons stand up out of their chairs." "All right. Slytherin then." "Slytherin?" The hall did not cheer. The hall for 1 second was not certain how to behave. The Slytherin table, which had been instructed by tradition to applaud, applauded after a heartbeat's pause and applauded a second too long when it did. The Gryffindor table, where Ron and Hermione were now sitting, applauded confusedly. From the high table, Snape, who had been very still since the boy's name had been called and the name had hit the air of the great hall like a stone hitting a pond, set his goblet down with great care. The headmaster beside him smiled gently and applauded as one applauds at a christening. The boy got down off the stool. He put the hat back on its place. He walked to the Slytherin table. He sat. He did not pick a seat by virtue of who was already sitting. He picked a seat at the end with his back to the wall, because Klaus had taught him that the back-to-the-wall seat is the seat one takes in a strange room, and Klaus had taught him this when he was 6. A pale boy with a sharp face slid 2 seats down to sit beside him. "Malfoy," the pale boy said, holding out a hand. "Draco, I've heard of you. Potter Mikaelson, Harry, I've heard of you also. Have you? My uncle Elijah keeps a list of European wizarding houses. Yours is on page 9. Out of how many pages? 12. That is acceptable, I suppose." "It is. Page 9 is good company." Draco Malfoy considered this, and then, by some instinct he could not have explained, decided that he would rather have this boy as a friend than as anything else, and shook the offered hand once and let it go, and the rest of the dinner passed with the Slytherin table, by silent agreement, treating Harry as a kind of polite cousin who had been raised abroad. The first week of school was, for Harry, primarily an exercise in not knocking anyone over. He had been trained for 7 years to move at speeds the schoolchildren around him could not have understood as anything but a blur, and he was, therefore, required to consciously slow himself in every corridor, in every staircase, in every classroom. He found this taxing in the way wearing tight shoes is taxing. Not painful exactly, only constant. He developed, by the 3rd day, a habit of pausing at the threshold of any new room and counting to 1 before entering, because Klaus had taught him that a man who paused at thresholds was a man who could not be ambushed at them. Hermione noticed the pause by the end of the first week. She did not ask about it. She copied the pause herself with mixed success. He found by the 3rd night the trick of the staircases. The staircases of Hogwarts were less moody when greeted in a low voice by name. He had learned from Davina that all old buildings of any size acquired, after a sufficient number of years, the rudiments of personhood and that they did not, on the whole, mind being acknowledged. He acknowledged them. They moved more politely for him after that. The portraits, too, noticed him. The portraits noticed everything, although they were given, on the whole, to a kind of village gossip in which the news of the morning was already old by lunch. Snape did not approach him until the 3rd evening. Snape waited because he was not a man who acted on impulse, and because the boy's name had set in his chest a small bell ringing that he wished before he spoke to identify. By the 3rd evening he had identified it, and he found the boy in the corridor outside the library, and he said, "Mr. Potter, Professor, you are aware that I knew your mother." "I am, Professor. My father has spoken to me of you. Your name appears in the family ledger under the year 1975. My father respects you. You have not been told this. I am telling you now." Snape was quiet for a long moment. His face did not move because Snape's face never moved. But his eyes, Severus Snape's black, observant, perpetually wary eyes, went for a count of 2 very still. "I will not pretend to like you, Mr. Potter," he said. He spoke with the cold formality he had spoken with since he had been 17 years old. He did not, on principle, use contractions. He had taken the principle from a teacher of his at Hogwarts who had taken it from a tutor of hers in Bavaria. "But I shall not impede you. There is a man on the 3rd floor of this castle who is not what he appears. You shall in due course attend to him. Until you have done so, I shall trouble you not at all." "Thank you, Professor. I do not require thanks from a boy whose father has stood at my left shoulder in 2 engagements and not held it against me that I was, at one of them, the cause of the engagement." "Yes, Professor. Good evening." "Good evening, Professor." Snape walked away. Harry walked into the library. Hermione at a table by the window looked up and saw his face and decided not to ask him at this exact moment what had happened because she had begun by the third evening to know him. On the morning of Halloween in the great hall at breakfast, the boy turned his head in mid-bite and stilled. The bite was a piece of toast cut into 2 triangles. He set it down. He set down also the second triangle. He looked across the hall, past the Slytherin table, past the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw tables, past the Gryffindor table where Ron and Hermione were arguing about the homework, to the staff table. He looked at one particular member of the staff table. He looked at the turban on the man's head. He looked at the man's eyes. He looked at the small dark space between the eyes and the turban. He smelled very faintly on the morning air of the great hall, the smell he had smelled 6 years before in a cupboard under a staircase in Surrey. His own scar on his own forehead did not glow. It had not glowed in 6 years. But it warmed in a way it had not warmed before, and the warmth was the warmth of 2 things meeting which had been made by the same hand and which knew one another in the way old siblings know one another badly and at once. He got up from the table. He walked in his neat school robes to the owlery. He wrote a letter. The letter was short. The letter said, "Father, the man in the turban has a thing of the Dark Lord in him. I do not believe he knows. I have not approached him. I require Elijah by tomorrow morning. Please send him alone. The school must not see a procession." He gave the letter to Hedwig. Hedwig left for Louisiana at 8:30. By noon the letter was in Klaus's hand on the gallery of the compound on Royal Street. By 1:15 Klaus had read it twice and set it down and called Elijah's name once, in a voice that did not have to be raised because Elijah had been waiting for the letter to come. By 2 in the afternoon Elijah had packed a black overcoat and a pair of leather gloves and the smallest possible valise, and was on a Concorde out of New York with a which passage Davina had set the night before. By 7:30 in the morning British time, Elijah was standing in the entrance hall at Hogwarts with the patient expression of a man who had not slept in 104 years and intended to be brisk about it. Dumbledore came down the stair. "Mr. Mikaelson," he said. "Welcome." "Headmaster," Elijah said, with a bow that was very precisely calibrated between respect and the absolute absence of any acknowledgement of authority. "I shall require your office and 10 minutes. I shall require also Professor Quirrell in a chair awake. I see. You shall not require to be present, but you shall not, I think, leave. That is, I suspect, what you require." "Yes. Then we are agreed." "We are." Dumbledore turned. He led Elijah up the stair, past the silent portraits, into the office. Quirrell was already there. Quirrell had been summoned, and Quirrell did not know why. Quirrell in his turban was sweating in a way that was not the day's heat. "Professor Quirrell," Elijah said, gently, sitting opposite him. "I shall be quick. I am sorry. The thing in your head has overstayed its welcome. With your permission, I shall remove it." "Please," Quirrell said, and then he did not say anything else, because the thing in his head had heard and had begun, by reflex, to attempt to take the larger of the 2 bodies in the room. It was the wrong room. Elijah's hand went out in a movement that to Albus Dumbledore's eye watching from beside the door was the absence of a movement and a sudden change of light. Elijah's hand went into Quirrell's chest. Elijah's hand did not exactly do what it had done a great many times before to other men in other rooms, because what it sought was not the heart. What it sought was a piece of soul that had attached itself to the man like a tick. The hand closed with extraordinary care around the tick. The hand drew. The hand drew very steadily and without haste, because to be hasty about the removal of a piece of soul from a man was to take the man with it. The hand drew for 46 seconds. What came out in Elijah's hand was a thing of black mist and a single small unsmiling face. The thing in the hand twisted. The thing in the hand spat in a voice that no longer had a body to be in a tongue Quirrell did not know but that Albus Dumbledore did, 3 syllables of unkindness. Elijah did not speak to the thing. Elijah held the thing for half a second and looked at it with the patient detached attention of an entomologist with an unwelcome but interesting specimen. Then Elijah closed his fist. There was a small sound, the sound of a moth being put out by a soft palm, and the thing was not in his hand any longer. It was a wraith screaming, racing past Dumbledore's head out the office window into the morning sky over the lake. It had not been 1 minute. Quirrell sagged in his chair, alive, paler than he had been but still attached to himself. Elijah, beside him, brushed his hand once across the lapel of his coat with the same fastidious motion Klaus had once used to brush dust off the lapel of a different coat in a different hallway. Elijah turned to Dumbledore. "You shall require a healer for the professor by lunchtime. You shall not, I think, require anything further. The wraith shall not return to this castle. It is no longer welcome on the premises. I have, with your permission, set a small condition on the premises which renders them to that particular wraith unwelcoming. Davina shall send by post the correct countercharm should you ever wish to revoke the condition. I do not on principle advise that you do. You have been," Dumbledore said, "in the castle for 9 minutes. Yes. That was, I think, more efficient than the methods I had been considering. I would not presume. You may presume. Then I shall observe that the boy's note was timely. He is a credit, he is paying attention, he shall continue to do so. I shall continue not to interfere with him. We are our house and yours in agreement. We are. There is of course the matter of the diplomatic standing of our family within Wizarding Britain. My brother has in his way asked me to remind you that this standing is not negotiable. I am aware. You shall, headmaster, find us in all other matters reasonable. I shall. Good, I am to take tea with Severus Snape before I leave. Will you walk me to the dungeons? Dumbledore walked Elijah to the dungeons. Elijah took tea with Snape, who did not, in Elijah's presence, speak more than 4 sentences, and was, in a manner of speaking, content for once at having had to use no more. They drank between them a single small pot of lapsang souchong, and Snape at the end of it said, "He is a quiet child. The quiet ones are sometimes the loudest in the long run in my experience." And Elijah said, "In ours also," and that was the whole of their conversation. By 11 in the morning Elijah was gone. The healer arrived at noon, as Elijah had said she would, and the defense against the dark arts post was by Tuesday advertised in the Prophet. The rest of the year passed quietly. Slytherin won the cup by a slim margin that Snape did not attempt to engineer. Hermione, having been granted by Christmas the loan of 2 specific volumes from the library at the compound, returned them in May with a 4-page handwritten note enumerating, in numbered order, the errata she had found in the 2nd edition, and Klaus, reading the note at his desk in New Orleans, snorted once in genuine pleasure and set it aside and wrote a short note back to her on the family stationery that began, "Miss Granger, Davina has read your errata. She is in agreement with item 3. She is in vehement disagreement with item 7. She shall write to you herself. Do not be alarmed if her letter arrives smelling faintly of camphor." And Hermione, in her dormitory, when the letter arrived, read it twice, folded it once, put it in the back of her diary, and did not show it to anyone until she was 42. By midnight the night of Elijah's visit, the boy was in his dormitory bed with Hedwig back on her perch and a letter from his father in his pocket which read simply, "Well done, son. The family. P.S. Your aunt insists on a Christmas at the compound. We have not you and I discussed this. It is now you and I discussed. You are coming. Klaus." He folded the letter. He put it under his pillow. He turned out the lamp. In the room over the courtyard at the compound, on a small easel by his bed, a portrait of him at 11, recently enchanted by Davina, raised one hand and waved goodnight to his father, who was passing the door on his way to the gallery to stand at the rail and look at the river. And to think, in the soft particular way the man had begun to think on certain late nights since the cupboard, about what it was to have, after 9 centuries of wanting, a son. There were, in the days after the Halloween morning Elijah had paid his short visit, some adjustments to the castle's understanding of the boy in Slytherin who had received it. The defense post was filled by the end of November by a young Belgian witch with a quiet temper and no obvious entanglements, who had taught at Beauxbatons for 6 years, and who had on her first morning walked into the great hall and met the boy's eye across the tables and inclined her head very slightly, with the careful neutrality of an instructor who had been informed in advance that one of her first-year students was not a first-year student in any meaningful sense. The boy had inclined his head back. They had not, in the rest of the school year, exchanged more than the formal pleasantries the curriculum required. She had taught him the disarming charm, he had performed it at the level of a 6th year, and she had marked the assignment excellent. "Please contain yourself." And he had written underneath in his own neat hand, "I am trying, ma'am," and she had read the note and laughed once into her tea. There were, too, the small daily adjustments by which a school accommodates the presence of a boy who is, in confidential record, listed in 3 ministry registers no one outside Whitehall knew existed. The kitchens, by the 2nd week, began producing, on Sunday mornings, a small dish of beignets sent up to the Slytherin table with a card that read, "Only for our young guest." And the house elves, when Harry sought them out to thank them in the kitchens, were so undone by being thanked at all that the matter was reported to the headmaster within the hour. And the headmaster, in his study, smiled into his lemon drop and set the matter aside without comment. The forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor became, in the 3rd week, less forbidden on the headmaster's quiet word, because the threat that had warranted its forbidding was no longer in residence. The Cerberus was relocated, to its eventual relief, to a wilder country. The mirror that had been placed in the chamber beneath was returned to its custodian in Switzerland with a polite note. By the end of November, Ron Weasley had begun to take dinner at the Slytherin table on Fridays without anyone, in any house, finding this worth remarking on. By the end of December, Hermione Granger was reading, with permission, in a corner of the Slytherin common room each evening between supper and her own curfew. Having been quietly granted the right by Draco Malfoy on the silent condition that she did not, in any of her 3 languages, address him as Draco, She addressed him as Malfoy, and he addressed her as Granger, and the arrangement worked. By the end of the year, all three of them, plus the pale-faced boy who had once been a Malfoy first and a friend second, had a habit of sitting in the courtyard by the lake after the last meal of the day to read, in slightly different books, the same period of European wizarding history, and to argue about it with the particular vigor of children who have been listened to by someone somewhere at some point in their lives and have decided to make a habit of it. The boy wrote his letters home as he had promised. He wrote them twice on Sundays. He wrote the first letter in the morning to his father, in which he gave a brief report on the school week, the weather, the homework, and any incident worth noting. He wrote the second letter in the evening, also to his father, which was a different kind of letter, longer, less formal, of the kind a son writes a father to say nothing in particular, by which he meant a great deal in particular. Klaus, on the gallery at Royal Street, read both letters as they arrived, in the early afternoon of his Monday, with the particular attention of a man for whom the small handwriting of his son had become, against all his prior estimation of himself, the central event of his week. He did not always answer in writing. Sometimes he answered with a small package, a book Davina had marked for him, a bar of dark chocolate Rebecca had purchased in Paris, a small black cravat Elijah had picked out, Call's signed contribution to a postcard. Sometimes he answered with a portrait sent for a week's visit from the boy's bedroom at home to the boy's dormitory at school. The portrait on these visits behaved itself mostly. It refused, on principle, to address Draco Malfoy. It sang, on certain evenings, a French lullaby of Rebecca's. It would not, by any persuasion, comment on Hermione's hair, which Hermione was both relieved and disappointed by. By the end of the year, when the boy returned to King's Cross with Hedwig on the trolley and his trunk heavier by a stack of borrowed books and a folded list of errata for Davina, 3 undersecretaries in 3 corridors of Whitehall had revised, in pencil, 3 separate filed memoranda concerning the boy's likely allegiance, and 2 of them had been wrong and the third had been only partly right. His father met him at the platform. The fog over King's Cross in late June was a different fog than the fog of November in Surrey, 6.5 years before. But the man in the long coat stood in it with a stillness that was the same stillness. He turned when the boy stepped through the pillar and looked at him for a count of 1 before stepping forward. "Son, father, you are taller. I am, and the school, they have survived me. I expected nothing less." He took the trolley with one hand, he put the other on the back of the boy's neck. "Come," he said, "your aunt is in the car. She has been weeping for an hour and shall pretend the wind, pretend with her." "Yes, father." They walked out into the day. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Across Europe. Paris in the second week of August was hot in the manner only Paris can be hot. The heat reflected from white stone, the heat rescented by everyone, the heat at the bottom of every cup of coffee. Harry, 12.5, stood in the small wrought-iron balcony of the apartment on the Rue de Sèvres with a cup of café au lait in his small hand and the particular grey-green attention with which he had recently begun reading The City, and he did not immediately know that he was being watched. He knew it in the way an animal knows it, by an absence rather than a presence. The street below, the Rue with its small cobbled stones and its blue trash bins and its 2 old women in cardigans gossiping by a bakery window, had 60 seconds ago contained 9 breathing organisms. It now contained 8. The missing breath was a man's. The missing man was not under the awning of the bakery. He was not in the small alley between the apartment building and the parfumerie. He was not, as far as Harry could ascertain by counting heartbeats, anywhere on the street. But Harry, who had spent 7 years among the Mikaelsons, knew that the absence of a body was, for a certain class of person, far more diagnostic than the presence of one. He set the cup down on the iron table at his elbow. He went inside. Uncle Call was lying on his back across 2/3 of a velvet chaise in the sitting room with a copy of Le Figaro folded over his eyes. He had been pretending to be asleep for an hour. He was not, strictly speaking, asleep. He removed the paper. "Yes, nephew. There is a person on this street whose heart has stopped beating in a manner I have only previously experienced in one person." Call sat up. He did not sit up the way a human sits up. He did not move at all and then was simply sitting. "Tell me his location." "He was below us 4 minutes ago. He has now moved. I cannot find him." Call crossed to the balcony in a movement that was the absence of a movement. He stood there for a count of 3. He looked at the rooftops of the Rue de Sèvres. He looked at the cars parked along the curb. He looked at the awning of the bakery. He looked at the alley by the parfumerie. He looked at the iron drainpipe of the building opposite. He closed his eyes for 1 second. He opened them. "Get your coat," he said. "Get the snowy, leave the trunk. We are going to Vienna. Now, in 4 minutes. Harry, my dear, your grandfather is in this city, and your grandfather is, on the whole, not in the habit of being in the same city as me unless he wishes me to be in his hand by sundown. Coat, owl, move." He moved. He moved at the speed Klaus had taught him to move when he had asked, 6 months earlier, to be taught the speed he had not yet been taught. He moved at the speed a hybrid wizard moves when the wizard half has been taught speed charms in addition to the wolf half's natural fleetness. He moved, in fact, at a speed that, when later remembered by a witness in the bakery, would be described as a strange wind that disarranged the napkins. He had his coat on by the time Call had said the word coat. He had Hedwig's cage in his hand by the time Call had said the word owl. He had not yet, at the age of 12, asked Hedwig to fly to a place he had not first written down for her. He wrote it now on a scrap of paper from the kitchen in 2.5 seconds. He gave it to her through the cage bars. He set the cage down, he opened the latch, she left. By minute 4 they were on the street. By minute 6 they were in the metro. By minute 11 they were at the Gare de l'Est. By minute 36 they were on the platform of an express to Stuttgart, and the express to Stuttgart was a train Call had not, properly speaking, paid for, and the steward, when he approached them in their first-class compartment, did not entirely remember why he had approached them and walked on. "Uncle." "Yes, you said grandfather." "I did, you said grandfather is here." "I did." Call set his elbow on the table between them. He set his chin on the heel of his hand. He looked at his small dark-haired nephew across the table, who had taken his glasses off to clean them on the cuff of his coat, and was, in the late summer light of a French train, very pale. "My father," Call said, "is 1,000 years and 3 months old. He is a vampire of the same line that made me, your father, your uncle Elijah, your aunt Rebecca, your other uncle Finn whom you have not met. He hates us. He has hated us since the morning he discovered that our mother, who was a witch of the first water, had cast a spell on the lot of us, at his request, you understand, to make us, in his lovely formulation, what we now are. He blames us for what we are. He blames our mother more, but she is, on this date, regrettably out of his reach. He carries a stake of the only wood in the world that can put us into the ground, which is a wood we shall not name on this train, because to name it is to summon a fragment of it, and we are not in the mood for a fragment today. He hunts us. He has hunted us more or less since the day we became what we are. He has been very tired and very thorough about it. Are you frightened? Number, you should be a little. All right, a little. Better, now drink your water." Harry drank his water. The train moved through France. Outside, in the long shadows of a country that did not, in its quiet way, mind being passed over by a vampire and a hybrid wizard who were of no particular interest to it, the corn began. It was in Stuttgart that the first attempt happened. They had changed trains. They were in a small compartment of a second express to Vienna, this one paid for, because Call, who had begun the day in a high mood, had decided in Strasbourg that he wished to behave with at least nominal legality for the next leg, which was, he said, an experiment. The conductor had taken their tickets. The conductor had walked out. The conductor had, 20 minutes after walking out, walked back in. There was something wrong with the conductor. "Tickets," the conductor said in German. "You have already taken them," Call said back in his perfect, unaccented German in a voice that had in the 4 words gone very quiet and very precise. "Tickets," the conductor said again, and his right hand in his coat pocket was holding a small object that was not a ticket punch. Call moved. Call moved the way Call had been moving for 2 centuries when surprised in a compartment by a man with the wrong thing in his pocket. Call's hand closed on the conductor's wrist. Call's other hand closed on the conductor's mouth, so that the conductor did not have time to make a sound he had been told to make. Call's third hand, and a great many people who had met Call in compartments over the centuries had, in the brief seconds of their meeting, formed the conviction that Call had 3 hands and not 2, drew the small object out of the conductor's coat pocket and held it up in the light from the window. It was to Harry's eye a tiny splinter of a pale yellow wood, wrapped in a wire of silver. It was no longer than the length of a fingernail. "Hello," Call said to the splinter, in the way one greets on a station platform, an old uncle one has not seen in a decade and would prefer to have continued not seeing. He flicked the splinter out the open window of the compartment. The splinter spun, glittered once in the German afternoon and was gone over a field. He turned his attention to the conductor. "Whose?" The conductor was struggling against Call's grip with the desperation of a man who knew he was about to be hurt and could not at this stage prevent it. "Whose?" Call said again. The conductor through Call's hand made a sound. "Yes, I know, he has compelled you. I shall undo it. You shall not remember any of this. You shall, when you wake in your bunk in the break car 90 minutes from now, remember only that the express to Vienna was hot, and that you should never accept a glass of schnapps from a stranger in a long coat at Stuttgart again. Sleep." The conductor slept. Call set him gently down on the seat opposite Harry. He arranged the conductor's hands in his lap. He took the man's hat off and put it on his own head briefly with an air of consideration and then put it back on the man's head. He sat down, he breathed out. "Right," he said, "Vienna. Uncle, yes. Was that? Yes. He is on the train. He was. He shall not be on the train any longer. He shall be on the rails ahead of the train by now, waiting at a station for us to disembark. We shall not disembark at the station he expects. We shall disembark at a station before. We shall acquire a different vehicle. We shall be in Vienna for tea. Uncle, yes. You said his stake is of a wood we cannot name. Yes. You did not say the wood was small enough to. It only needs to find the heart, dear nephew. It does not, properly speaking, need to be enormous. All right. Your father has all my life dressed for the night when our father is in the country. I have all my life dressed for the night when our father is in the country also. It is the family equivalent of carrying an umbrella. We shall, you and I, when this is over, get you a wardrobe of the right umbrellas. I had been meaning to. I have been remiss. I apologize. There is no need. There is some need. Harry looked at his uncle. He looked at his uncle's face, which was, beneath the easy banter, the face of a man who had for 200 years run and was now running again with a 12-year-old nephew on the seat opposite him whose heart he had personally been listening to with one of his ears since they had got onto the train. Uncle. Yes, you are afraid. A little. All right. The boy turned and looked out the window. The German afternoon went past. He took very carefully from the inside pocket of his coat the small stoppered bottle of his father's blood that he had been carrying for 7 years, since the morning of his 8th birthday, and that he had refilled on his last day at the compound in July with a fresh draught from his father's wrist. He did not drink it. He set the bottle on the table between him and his sleeping conductor and the train, and he kept his hand on it. They got off the train at a small station in the Wacho Valley, which was not their station, and which was, in late summer, frequented mostly by walkers. They walked. They walked along the Danube under the linden trees for a mile and a half. Karl acquired a small motor car of an older make from a vintner's drive, with the vintner's blessing, because Karl had compelled the vintner thoroughly and politely and had left him 3 gold coins on the kitchen table. They drove. They drove into Vienna at 8 in the evening. Karl had a flat in the 3rd district which he had not visited in 11 years, and which the housekeeper had been keeping in the manner of a Viennese housekeeper who had been told that one day someone would arrive, and that on that day she would not require, on principle, to be told. She had made up a bed in the 2nd bedroom for the boy. She had set out on the kitchen table a small plate of cold cuts and a small dish of pickled cucumber and a small loaf of black bread. She left without speaking by the back stair the moment Karl turned the lock. Eat, Karl said. Yes, uncle. Sleep. Yes, uncle. Do not draw the curtain in the front room. No, uncle. I am going to make a telephone call. To father. To your father. Harry ate. Harry slept on his side in the 2nd bedroom of the flat in the 3rd district of Vienna, with the small stoppered bottle of his father's blood in his fist, in the way he had slept since he was 8. He did not dream. The wolf in him did not dream. The witch in him did not dream. The boy in him, who had not, properly speaking, been entirely a boy since the age of 5, did, in some small uncentral part of him, dream briefly of an iron gate and a wall of magnolia and brick, and the dream was a sweet one. By midnight a man in a long charcoal coat was on a Concorde out of New Orleans. By dawn, Vienna time, Klaus Mikaelson was standing in the kitchen of the flat in the 3rd district drinking the small cup of black coffee Karl had put into his hand, and listening to Karl's account of the previous 24 hours with the very still attention of a man whose face had not, in the entire account, moved a single muscle. When Karl had finished, Klaus set down the cup. Where now? Prague. He is on the rails. He has crossed Stuttgart by now, possibly Linz. He shall be in Prague by tomorrow night. He shall expect us at the apartment we keep on Maltese Namesty. He has known about that apartment since 1798. We shall not be there. We shall be at the old town square. Where in the square? Under the clock, Klaus considered. He considered with the level gray-green attention his son had inherited from him, although the son did not know yet that he had inherited it. Yes, Klaus said. Under the clock, he shall come at midnight. He has a sense of theater he has never admitted to. He has. You shall keep the boy at this end of the square. You shall keep him behind the line of the booths. You shall not let him into the square. Klaus, brother, you shall not. The boy is 12. The boy is many things, Klaus. He is 12. The other things shall keep. As you say. By noon Klaus and Karl and the boy were on a train to Prague. By dusk they were in a hotel on the right bank of the Vltava, 3 doors down from a bookshop and 2 from a tobacconist. By 11 that night Klaus was on a bench in the old town square in the soft golden lamplight, hands in the pockets of his long coat, watching the small revolving figures of the astronomical clock on the south face of the town hall do their hourly performance for the last tourists of the evening. By 11:30 the tourists had gone. By 11:45 there was nobody in the square but Klaus and a great many statues and a pigeon, and distantly, a young Czech policeman on the corner of Tinska Street who had begun, without being able to explain why, to be very interested in the inside of his own helmet. At 12, the bells of the old town hall began. At the first stroke of 12, a figure stepped out of the doorway of the tin church on the east side of the square. The figure was a man. The figure wore a long coat, but it was an older coat than Klaus's coat, of a cut that had not been in fashion since the 1860s, and the figure walked the way a man walks who has not in any of the past 140 years found it necessary to hurry. Mikkel crossed the square. He stopped 20 paces from his son. Niklaus. Father, you have a boy. I have. He is not yours. He is mine. You did not make him. I am his father. Mikkel's mouth pulled into the small movement that, for him, was the gesture other men used a laugh for. He did not laugh. He had not in 9.5 centuries laughed in the presence of any of his sons. You have wanted a boy a long time, Niklaus. I have. You have one now. I do. He is going to die tonight. He is not. You shall not stop me. I shall. Mikkel drew from inside the long old coat a stake of pale yellow wood the length of a forearm. The wood in the lamplight of the square was the color of grain at harvest. The wood was the only wood in the world that did the thing it did. He set its point on the cobble at his feet. He waited. Klaus did not draw anything. Klaus had not, in 8 centuries, found anything in the world he required to draw. He took his hands out of his pockets. He walked, at a pace that was the pace of a man who had not in 8 centuries found a fight worth hurrying to, into the center of the square. The boy in the alley behind the booths with Karl's hand on his shoulder watched. The fight began on the second stroke of the bell. Mikkel moved first because Mikkel always moved first. Mikkel had decided somewhere around the year 1100 that the first move was a moral position and had held to it. The stake came up. The stake came down. The cobblestone where Klaus had been standing cracked into 7 small pieces. Klaus was not on it. Klaus was at Mikkel's left shoulder and his hand was on Mikkel's wrist, and Mikkel's wrist made a small sound, the sound a dry branch makes when a wolf bites it, and the stake dropped. It did not hit the cobble. Mikkel caught it in his other hand on the way down. The other hand came up. It came up faster than the first. The stake came at Klaus's chest in a movement that, to the policeman on Tinska Street, would later be described in his report as the air doing something. Klaus turned his shoulder. The stake went past the shoulder by an inch. Klaus's hand was on the stake's shaft. Mikkel's hand was on the stake's shaft. They held for 1 second in a position that 2 men in an oil painting might hold for 100 years. Mikkel broke first, because Mikkel was older, because Mikkel was angrier, because Mikkel had been carrying this fight in his bones since before the city around them had been a city. He twisted. The stake came down on the lateral plane. Klaus took it against the cobble of his own forearm in a way that should have cost him the forearm and did not. What came up from the cobble was a small sound of cracking, and the cobble it had been was, after, no longer a cobble, and the forearm, Klaus's forearm, was, when Klaus turned his wrist and rolled the joint, intact. The stake had glanced. The stake had not bitten. Mikkel came in close. Mikkel came in close because that was the only way the stake found a heart. Mikkel's free hand went for Klaus's throat. Klaus's free hand went for Mikkel's free hand. Mikkel's third hand and his son's had for 1,000 years formed the conviction that their father had 3 hands went for the stake's grip below Klaus's. The boy in the alley moved. The boy did not move because Karl let him. Karl did not let him. The boy moved past Karl because Karl, for 1/2 second, had been looking at his father and not at his nephew, and the boy had, in 7 years at the compound, learned a great many things, and one of those things was that the 1/2 second was the door. The boy was in the square. He did not, properly speaking, walk. He had not, properly speaking, walked. He had moved as Klaus had moved when Klaus had crossed number 4 Privet Drive in November of 1986. He was at Mikkel's left side. He had a hand on Mikkel's wrist. He was 12. Mikkel, for the first time in 9.5 centuries, was very briefly surprised. The boy did not speak. The boy spoke a thing in the witch tongue, in a word he had been working on with Davina for 3 years. In a syllable Davina had said he was not yet permitted to use in public unless what was happening in public was the kind of thing that justified the use. The syllable left him. The syllable was a small old hooked syllable, and it caught the inside of Mikkel's wrist and turned it. Mikkel's hand did not drop the stake. Mikkel's hand was, in some sense more difficult to describe, set on fire from the inside. He bellowed. The wolf in Mikkel bellowed too. Mikkel was not, by any precise definition, a wolf. He was a vampire of the first water made by a witch, but the part of him that had been made out of the wolf in the first place, before his sons had ever been born, screamed. He turned. He turned to look at the boy who had spoken the syllable. What he saw, in the lamplight of the old town square at 12 minutes past midnight in August in the year 1993, was a small dark-haired boy with round repaired glasses and a green sigil on his forehead that had been put there by Mikkel's own dead wife. And the boy was looking at him with a level gray-green attention that the man knew, because he had seen it once, 1,000 years before, in a son of his own who had, after the sigil-making, gone on to a life Mikkel had never approved of and could no longer interrupt. He hesitated. It was a small hesitation. It was a hesitation of perhaps a quarter of a second. In the quarter of a second, Klaus's hand was at Mikkel's throat. Klaus did not in that moment kill his father. He could have in that moment and he did not, and the not doing was a choice he made with the speed at which he made all his choices. He lifted, he carried. He set his father with a slow, heavy, precise care against the wall of the old town hall under the astronomical clock, 10 feet off the cobbles with the stake arm pinned with the throat held, and he said in the soft Norse of his boyhood, "Father, go." Mikkel bared his teeth. "Father, go. You shall not have the boy, you shall not have me tonight. You shall have, if you press it, my hand around your heart, and you do not, on this date in this square, wish my hand around your heart. Go." He let his father drop. Mikkel landed on the cobbles. He did not stumble. He did not, properly speaking, sway. He stood on the cobbles with the stake in his uninjured hand and the burnt wrist of his injured hand at his side, and he looked at his son, and he looked at his son's son, and he looked very briefly at the boy who had spoken the syllable. He turned. He walked across the square. He did not run. He did not, in his 9.5 centuries, run from anything, and he was not on this date going to begin. He walked into the same doorway he had walked out of, and the doorway closed behind him, and the bells of the old town hall, which had been ringing the whole of the fight, finished their 12th stroke and were quiet. Klaus turned. He turned to look at his son. His son in the middle of the square stood with his hand still half raised in the posture the syllable had taken him to, and his small face was, for the first time in 7.5 years at the compound, entirely white. "Son." The boy looked at him. "Son." The boy did not move. Klaus crossed the square. He went to one knee on the cobble in front of his son. He put both hands on his son's shoulders very gently. "Look at me. Harry, love, look at me." The boy looked at him. "You are all right. Yes, you are not hurt. Number, you came into the square. Yes, I told you not to. Yes. Are you sorry?" the boy thought. The boy considered the question with the level gray-green attention he had inherited, although he did not know it, from the man whose hand was on his shoulder. He considered in the considering that he was 12 years old and had spoken a syllable in a square that had ended a fight which had been waiting since the 11th century to end, and that the man whose hand was on his shoulder had not been able by himself to end the fight, and that the syllable he had spoken had cost something which would, in some accounting he could not yet name, be reckoned later. "No, father," he said, "I am not sorry." Klaus looked at him. He drew his son into him. He put one hand on the back of the small dark head. He put the other across the small back. He held him for a count of 15. When he let him go he was, again, a man of 9 centuries with a hand on the back of his son's neck, and not a man of 9 centuries who had briefly been a different kind of father than he had been before. "Come, little wolf." "Yes, we shall go home." Yes, they went home. In a hotel in Prague the next morning a maid found, in the corridor of the second floor, a small mark on the carpet that looked very like the burn of a syllable spoken in the wrong tongue. And she said nothing about it to her supervisor, because she had grown up in this city and she had been raised by her grandmother to recognize certain marks and not to inquire. She put a small rug over the mark. She moved on. In the 3rd district of Vienna, in a flat on a quiet street, a Viennese housekeeper let herself in with the second key, found the table cleared and the bed in the second bedroom made up and the dish of pickled cucumber gone. And she nodded once with a satisfaction she did not betray, and she went out again by the back stair. In the old town square of Prague, at sundown, the astronomical clock on the south face of the town hall did its small daily performance for the tourists of the evening. And not a single one of the tourists noticed that one of the figures on the clock, the small wooden figure of death with the bell in his hand, had in its hourly bow paused for a quarter of a second longer than it had paused the night before. In the direction of a small dark-haired boy who was no longer in the square but whom the figure remembered. In a long charcoal coat on a Concorde over the Atlantic, the boy slept against his father's shoulder, and the father for 7 hours did not move the shoulder and looked through the small oval window of the aeroplane out at a night sky he had been moving under for 9 centuries and thought about his own father, and about his son, and about which of the two of them he had that night been more frightened of losing. There were 4 days at home before the boy returned to Hogwarts, and the 4 days were quiet in the particular way the courtyard at the compound went quiet when its inhabitants had agreed, without speaking, to be quiet for the benefit of one among them. Rebecca said nothing of the syllable. Elijah said nothing of the syllable. Davina, who had taught it to him, said only one thing in the kitchen on the second morning. She had set a small dish of beignets in front of him and a small dish of café au lait, and she had pulled out a chair and sat opposite him with the air of a woman who had decided in advance to say only one thing about it and to say the one thing well. "Child." "Yes, Davina, you used the syllable." "Yes, how did it taste?" he thought. He thought with the level gray-green attention. He thought of the moment in the old town square in which the small old hooked syllable had passed through his teeth and into the air of a city older than several countries, and he thought in the same moment of the moment after the syllable in which his hand had still been on his grandfather's wrist and his grandfather had hesitated, It tasted, he said, of something I should not, I think, have eaten. That is the right answer. What does that mean? It means you shall not use it again. All right. It means you shall not use it again, she said, and she set her hand with great gentleness on the back of his small one on the kitchen table. Until you have in your bones enough of you to spare. You are 12. You are not yet ready to give the syllable what it asks. You have given it a piece of you in Prague. The piece shall grow back. It shall take a year, possibly 2. When it has grown back, child, you shall be permitted to give the syllable another piece if you require it, but not yet. Eat your beignet. He ate his beignet. He did not that year or the next ask for the syllable again. He carried instead in the inside pocket of his coat the small stoppered bottle of his father's blood that he had carried in Prague, and he did not for many months after Prague set it down. On the third morning Karl came to him in the library. Karl had been quieter in the days since Prague than Karl had been at any point in the 7 years of Harry's life with the family. Karl set himself in his shirt sleeves in the armchair across from the small dark-haired boy who was reading on his knees the 3rd volume of a history of the Bohemian Witches' Council, and Karl said, "Nephew, uncle, I let you into the square. You did not." "I did, nephew. I had a hand on your shoulder and I looked away and you went past me. The first sentence is the only sentence of that paragraph that is mine." "All right. I shall apologize once. I shall not apologize twice. I do not apologize twice. Listen carefully, nephew, I am sorry." "All right. You shall not on any night I am with you in a foreign square do that again." "All right. If you require to do it, I shall do it for you. If I am insufficient, your father shall do it for me. You are 12 and you are also, in some accounting I shall not enumerate here, the most expensive item this family possesses, and we shall not spend you. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Now read me the paragraph about the trial of Anna Dracula. I have always loved a Bohemian trial." Harry read it to him. The two of them in the library at the compound for an hour read Bohemian witch history aloud to one another, and Karl's hand beside the armchair with his usual cup did not during the hour hold the cup quite still. Harry did not comment. Karl drank. On the 4th morning before dawn, before the household, Klaus took him out onto the gallery one final time. They stood at the rail. The river had its low summer voice. The mockingbird had given up the magnolia branch a fortnight earlier for a more discreet branch on the cypress over the alley and had not been heard from since. In his absence, Klaus, on certain mornings, found himself listening for the bird that was not there, as for the absence of an old enemy whose enmity had grown into a kind of habit. The lamps were out. The day was about to be hot. "You are leaving tomorrow." "Yes. The school does not know you came home." "Number good. We shall keep it so. I have set with Davina a small condition on the wards of the school, which means that your grandfather shall not, for at least 18 months, be permitted to set a foot upon the grounds. Your grandfather is on the whole observant of wards. He may test the condition. He shall not, I think, break it. He is in any case this morning somewhere east of us by 1,000 miles tending to his wrist. He shall come again. He has come for me in one fashion or another for 9 centuries. He shall not stop because of one square in Prague, but he is on the whole a man who has been instructed the previous night that the cost of the boy is the boy's grandfather's son. He may, on consideration, decide that the cost is not this year worth it. Yes, father. You shall of course tell me at once if any sign of him surfaces." "Yes, father." Klaus was quiet for a count of 3. He had spent the previous 3 days in a manner he had not described to anyone, considering the inside of his own forearm where the stake had glanced and not bitten, and his fingers against the wrought iron rail under his hand were laid in a very particular configuration. He looked at his son. "There is a piece of you, son, which is the piece you have given to the syllable, and which is, on this morning, smaller than it was a week ago. Davina has told me. Yes, we shall in the year ahead restore it. It shall not on its own restore. It shall require your father to give it a small drink on certain mornings of a kind of blood which is not the blood you have been receiving on your birthday. We shall begin it tonight." "Yes, father, you shall not be afraid." "No, father, you are not your grandfather's. You are not even, properly speaking, mine, although I would have it so. You are your own. We shall not in this household ever again send you into a square." "I went in, father." "You did. You shall not again." "We shall practice in the year ahead the standing back. I have been remiss in not practicing it with you sooner. It is a hard practice. It shall take both of us." "Yes." The boy reached then of his own accord and put his small hand into his father's larger one on the wrought iron rail. He had not done that in 7.5 years on his own initiative, except on the very first morning at the kitchen in Knightsbridge when the breakfast had been triangular. He did it now. His father did not at any point in the next quarter of an hour take his hand back. The sun came up over the river. Somewhere east of them by 1,000 miles, in a city Mickle preferred for the comfort of its old hospitals, an older man bathed his wrist in cold water and considered, with the patience of 1,000 years, whether to come west again that autumn. He decided in the way Klaus had predicted that he would not. He decided to wait. The boy was 12. The boy would be older. Mikkel was patient, and Mikkel on this morning had cause for the first time in 9.5 centuries to wonder whether the patience was, at last, beginning to be a vice. By Christmas, the boy was at the compound again. By the spring, he was back at the school. By the summer of his 14th year, on a morning in the dining room of the compound, his name would, against all the bookmakers of 3 ministry registries, come out of a goblet that was not supposed to know him. But that, on this particular August morning, was 18 months away. He had a piece of beignet on his lip. He had a small stoppered bottle of his father's blood in his pocket. He had a quiet hand in a larger hand on a wrought iron rail in a courtyard in New Orleans. He was 12. He was very precisely where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The triwizard. It is a small and singular thing, the way an artifact can change a room. The goblet of fire had been sitting on its 3-legged plinth in the entrance hall of the castle for 2 days when Harry passed it on the morning of the second day, 14 years old and very nearly 5'8", with his coat collar turned against the November cold of a corridor that had not been properly heated in 1100 years. And he passed it with the precise indifference of a boy who had been raised, by a man of 9 centuries, not to look at things on plinths because to look was to invite. The goblet on its plinth lit slightly as he went by. He did not see it. He did not look. He went on to charms. In the room above the entrance hall, a portrait of a small dark-haired boy at 11, very recently moved from a dormitory in the dungeons to a casement in the West Tower at Hermione's intercession, raised one eyebrow at the corridor below in the manner of his uncle Elijah, and noted to the portrait of a sleeping bishop in the frame to its left that the artifact in the entrance hall had developed a small problem. The sleeping bishop did not wake. On the evening of the second day in the great hall, the goblet did its public performance. The hall was full. 3 schools were in residence, the Hogwarts students at their 4 house tables, the Beauxbatons delegation at the Ravenclaw table in pale blue, the Durmstrang delegation at the Slytherin table in red. Harry sat at the Slytherin table with Draco Malfoy at his left elbow and Theodore not at his right, and Hermione at the Gryffindor table opposite, catching his eye, twice in 5 minutes, with the small mutually arched eyebrow they had perfected since the second year for the purpose of saying, without speaking, "I have a question about this, you and I shall discuss it." The goblet at the high table on its plinth spat its 3 pieces of parchment. Cedric Diggory, a roar from Hufflepuff. Fleur de Lacre, a clean ripple from Beauxbatons. Victor Crumb, a growl from Durmstrang. The goblet went quiet. The headmaster put out his hand and the room sighed and began to rise. The goblet lit again. It lit not the friendly low orange of the previous 3 lightings, but a green that nobody in the hall except perhaps 2 staff members and a small dark-haired boy at the Slytherin table had ever seen on a goblet before. The green was a particular green. It was a green that Davina of New Orleans had a name for in 3 languages. It was the green of Esther's old curse on a small forehead. The goblet spat a 4th piece of parchment. The headmaster caught it without rising. He held it for a count of 2. He read it. He read it again. He did not immediately speak. The hall went in the silence, the kind of silence a hall goes when in front of it a man who has been speaking for 45 years cannot find for the first time an opening sentence. Harry Potter Mikaelson, Dumbledore said very mildly into the silence, and his voice did not carry any further than it had to. The Slytherin table did not stand. The Slytherin table, on a tacit agreement at the head of which Draco Malfoy was sitting, did not ever stand for any reason that was not collective. Harry rose on his own and walked the length of the great hall to the small door at the back behind the high table, and the headmaster turned his head as he passed and said very quietly, "Mr. Potter Mikaelson, the antechamber, please," and Harry, with the smallest possible inclination of his head, said "Headmaster," and went in. In the antechamber the 3 champions were standing in 3 corners of the same hearth, like figures in a poorly arranged carriage clock. They looked up when he came in. Cedric, the kind one with the kind face. Fleur, the curious one with the curious face. Victor, the cautious one with the cautious face. They had all heard in the silence after the goblet's second performance his name being called. "You are too young," Fleur said immediately in French without preamble. "I am," Harry agreed back in French with no inflection. "Why did the cup say your name?" "I do not know. Did you put it in?" "Number, did one of your family put it in?" "Number, they did not need to. They have other ways." Cedric, who had been watching this exchange with the air of a young man who had been told all his life that he was the most important person in any small room he was in and had, this evening, by the verdict of a goblet, been told he was the second most, said mildly, "Are you all right?" "I am, Cedric, thank you. It is going to be a complicated year." "It is. I shall not on principle allow you to be hurt at the tasks." Harry looked at him. He looked at Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff with the level gray-green attention. He saw a young man of 17 with light brown hair and the kind of jaw on which other young people of 17 wrote, in their diaries, very long sentences. And he saw, behind the jaw, a small unfailing decency that had been put there by parents who had not, in any generation, allowed the decency to go out. He decided in that moment in the antechamber under the four candelabra that whatever happened in the tasks ahead, he was not going to leave Cedric Diggory in a maze. "Thank you, Cedric," he said. "I shall not on principle allow you to be hurt at the tasks either." "Oh, it is the same principle." "All right." The door opened. The headmaster and the four heads of school came in. Klaus came in 2 minutes later by means he had not entirely shared with the headmaster in his long charcoal coat, and Klaus did not, on his arrival, say anything for 60 seconds. He stood in the corner he had selected. He looked at his son. He looked at the headmaster. He looked at Madame Maximin Karkaroff and the man from the ministry whose name was Crouch. "My son," Klaus said, in a tone that was conversational in the way the surface of a deep cold lake is conversational, did not enter himself in this contest. "Mr. Mikaelson, I am not a man of titles, headmaster. I have a great many of them. I do not require their use. My son did not enter himself. My son will not enter himself. My son is, in the goblet's reading, contracted to participate. I am not, on this occasion, going to break the goblet for you, although I could. I have decided that my son shall participate. I have decided this because I have asked him in the doorway 20 seconds before I came in, and he has told me that he is willing. I shall be in residence for the tasks. I shall sit in the box with the school heads. I shall make no improper interventions. If, however, in any of the 3 tasks my son is in danger of a kind a 14-year-old should not be in danger of," he turned his head very slightly toward Crouch, who in fairness had not done anything yet to deserve the angle, "I shall make a proper intervention. We are agreed." "Mr. Mikaelson, we cannot. We are agreed." There was a quiet. The headmaster had the air of a man who on the whole found the conversation more interesting than he was professionally permitted to admit. He smiled in his quiet way into his beard. "We are agreed," he said. "Good son. Father, are you well?" "I am well." "You shall write Davina this evening with the news. She has been expecting it for a fortnight. She shall send you the small charm she has been making." "Yes, father." "You shall in the tasks behave with restraint." "Yes, father." "You shall not on any task speak the syllable." "No, father." Good night, son. I shall be in the visitors' wing at the foot of the West Tower. You shall, if you require me, find me there." "Yes, father." Klaus left. In the dormitory at midnight, a small dark-haired boy of 14 sat on the edge of his bed in pajamas patterned with small blue stars and wrote, in his neat hand, a letter to a witch in New Orleans which began, "Davina, the goblet has performed," and continued for 2 pages in a tongue that Hermione, had she been able to read it, would have called Old Provençal, but that Davina, when she read it the next morning on the gallery at Royal Street, recognized as the older tongue and read once and laid down. And went to find her grandmother's bowls. The first task came in late November. It was, the participants were informed in the morning, dragons. The dragons had been transported in cages by a great many handlers from the north of Romania, and they had been put in the meantime into a paddock at the foot of the lake, and they were not in the best of moods. Each of the 4 champions was to draw one. Each was to retrieve from the dragon's nest a single golden egg. Harry drew the Hungarian horntail. The Hungarian horntail was the largest dragon in the paddock, and the most ill-tempered, and the only one of the 4 who had, on her arrival 3 days earlier, killed 2 handlers in the course of being unloaded from her crate. The handlers had not, on the whole, been adequate. Harry, on receiving the horntail figure in his palm, regarded it with the level gray-green attention for some seconds. He pocketed it. He went out into the arena. The arena was a sandy hollow, walled in stone, ringed in stands. The dragon was at the far end. The dragon was not pleased about the audience. She had in front of her a clutch of eggs, one of which was gold and did not belong to her, and which she had nevertheless been instructed with very thorough magic to defend as though it did. Harry did not draw his wand. He did not need to. He had been taught by his Uncle Call that the showy thing was not always the necessary thing, and by his father that the necessary thing was sometimes the doing of nothing at all for as many seconds as it took the room to remember itself. He walked into the center of the arena. He stopped. He looked at the dragon. He spoke to her. He did not speak in Parseltongue. Parseltongue was a snake's language, and dragons were not snakes, they were, as Klaus had once explained to him on the gallery one summer evening, wolves with wings. He spoke therefore to the dragon in a tongue he had been taught a piece of by Davina and a piece of by his father, a tongue that was older than English by some thousands of years, and that had been the tongue used by the first witches of northern Europe to address the wolves of the forest when they had wished to be heard. He used 3 syllables. He used them softly. He said in the tongue an old phrase of 3 syllables which translated with a small loss as "Sister, I see you." The Hungarian horntail, who had not in her life been addressed by any creature on two legs other than as a thing to be set on fire, stilled. She looked at him. "Sister," he said in the tongue, "I shall not take an egg of yours. There is a gold egg in the clutch which is not yours. The men who put it there were not your kin. They had no business with your clutch. May I remove it?" The dragon shifted her weight. She blew through her teeth the small soft chuff a wolf makes when she has decided with reservations that she is not immediately going to bite. "May I remove it, sister?" She lowered her head. He walked across the arena. He picked up the gold egg out of the clutch. He set it under his arm. He bowed slightly to the horntail in the careful manner Elijah had been teaching him for 10 years, and he walked back across the arena. He turned at the gate. He said in the tongue, in case she had not heard him say it, "Thank you, sister." She blew through her teeth the small chuff again. He went out. The stands, which had not on the whole understood what they had been watching, applauded. Klaus in the visitor's box did not applaud. He had not in 9 centuries applauded anyone for anything on principle. But he did in his lap, with one thumb against the cuticle of his other, perform a small private gesture which Elijah beside him recognized and which Rebecca on his other side, in a hat that no other hat in the stands was good enough to forgive, also recognized, and which Call on her other side also recognized, and Call said into Rebecca's ear in French, "Did he just?" "He did. Twice in 100 years, sister. Twice. It's a record." The second task was in February. It was the lake, it was hostages. There was a girl from the village. A small French girl from the Beauxbatons delegation by the name of Gabrielle, who was Fleur's sister, and there was a Bulgarian girl from the Durmstrang delegation, and there was Ron Weasley, who had been selected to be Harry's hostage on the unexamined grounds that he was Harry's friend. He was. The selectors had not, on the whole, examined whom Harry would actually most preferred to be hostage. They had taken the visible, easy guess. They had been correct in the rough but not in the precise. They had not realized that Harry would, on receiving the news, also have wished to know that Hermione was safe, that Draco was safe, that a portrait of him at 11 in the West Tower had not been moved. He went into the lake at the starting whistle. He did not, on entering, perform any of the breathing charms the other 3 champions had performed. He did not need to. He walked the lake bottom. The merpeople, watching him from their village on the floor of the lake, did not, on the whole, find this acceptable, and several came out to remonstrate, and were remonstrated back in their own language, which Harry had been taught a piece of at Hermione's insistence in the 3rd year. The Merking said in his own language, "You are not a thing that should be on the bottom of my lake," and Harry said in his own, "I am not, sir. I have come for the boy. I shall be gone in a quarter of an hour. I shall not in the quarter of an hour look at any of the things on the bottom of your lake that you would prefer I did not look at." The Merking considered. "Very well." He went on. He found the 4 hostages tied to the Mer village's central post. He undid Ron. Cedric by then had also found his hostage and was untying her. Krum had not yet arrived. Fleur had not yet arrived. The 2 boys looked at one another across the post. They looked at the 2 remaining girls. "We have an hour," Cedric said in Mertung. "They shall not survive an hour without breathing." "They shall," Harry said back. "The enchantment has provided for an hour." "Yes, but Fleur is not coming. I have heard her on the rocks. She has been driven back by the Grindelows. She shall not in the hour return." Harry looked at the small French girl tied to the post. "Then I shall take Gabrielle also. I shall take the Bulgarian girl. Krum may yet, Krum may not take her." They each took their own hostage and one other, and they walked the lake bottom up together, and they came out at the surface together. And the stands, which had not in any meaningful sense gone home in the hour the champions had been under, came back to themselves and noticed and applauded, and Klaus in the visitor's box did not applaud but did, with the same thumb on the same cuticle, perform the same small private gesture. Twice in February. 3 times in the calendar year of the tournament. Between the second task and the third was the part of the year the school had begun, by tradition, to refer to as the Yule. There was a ball. Harry, of all the boys in his year, did not lack for partners. He was, by Christmas of his 14th year, just under 6 feet tall, with very neat hair and a bearing that owed something to his uncle Elijah and a good deal more to a boy who had been taught, in a small dining room in a townhouse in Knightsbridge, that the chair at the head of the table was kept for a man in a long coat, and that the man in the long coat did not, on the whole, mind if the boy in his keeping sat in it. He went with Hermione after a brief negotiation. The negotiation involved a single sentence from each of them. His sentence was, "I shall escort you to the Yule Ball if you are willing." Her sentence was, "Yes, but you shall not on any account dance with anyone else for the second waltz, because the second waltz is mine." He danced. He danced, in fact, with the small adjustment of muscle around the mouth that, since his 8th birthday, he had on occasion permitted himself, and he danced well because his Aunt Rebecca had been teaching him in the courtyard since his 9th year, and Rebecca had not in 9 centuries allowed a dance to be done badly in her vicinity. He danced the first with Hermione. He danced the second with Hermione, as agreed. He danced the third with Fleur de Lacquer's small sister Gabrielle, who at 10 was permitted for one dance on the floor of the Great Hall by her sister, and Gabrielle on the floor of the Great Hall looked up at the boy who had carried her out of the lake in February and said in her careful English, "Thank you for bringing me up, Mr. Harry," and Harry said, "It was my pleasure, mademoiselle," and Gabrielle after the dance told Fleur that she would marry Harry Potter Mikaelson. If it were not too inconvenient, and Fleur said only, "We shall see, ma petite," and did not, in any of the years after, attempt to talk her sister out of the position. Klaus, who had not been invited to the Yule Ball on the grounds that he was a guardian and not a parent in the school's official register, had nevertheless arranged to be in the country that week, and had taken a small private supper at the Three Broomsticks on the night of the ball with Elijah and a member of staff whose name does not, on this occasion, require recording. The three of them ate well. Klaus left a tip larger than the meal. The member of staff, who had been an undersecretary in another life, returned to her offices in London on the Monday, and revised the boys' filed memorandum in pencil for the third and final time. There was, on the evening of the 28th, a Christmas at the compound that Harry was permitted by the school to take on portkey on the strict understanding that the portkey was the property of the family and the school had not provided it. He took it. He arrived in the courtyard at sundown. Davina had set the table for 6. Rebecca had bought in Paris a small hand-stitched jacket of midnight blue that Harry had not, in his entire life, owned the equivalent of. Elijah had purchased, for him, a book Hermione had been wanting and that Elijah had located in a small bookshop in Innsbruck. Karl had brought from a trip the precise itinerary of which Klaus had not requested, a small jar of honey from Sicily and a bone-handled fork that matched the bone-handled knife. Klaus had on the table at the head of his son's place a folded piece of parchment. The parchment was a deed. The deed was to a small property on the edge of the bayou on the lake with a single cypress on the bank and a small wooden dock of the kind a man might build in the years ahead a quiet house upon. The deed read in Klaus's hand to my son Harry, against the year he may wish a place at home of his own, with my love. Harry read the deed, he read it twice. He set it down, he looked at his father. He did not, at any point in the count of the rest of the evening, say anything about it directly. He sat at the table and he ate the meal and he laughed twice at Karl and he laughed once at Rebecca's account of a hat, and he listened with the level gray-green attention to Davina's small grave bulletin of the witch politics of New Orleans, and at the end of the meal when the 4 other adults had risen and gone in their various directions to the various corners of the compound that were theirs, he turned to his father who had not risen and he said, "Father." "Yes, son, thank you. You are welcome. I shall build a house there. I know, it shall not have a cupboard in it. I know that also, son. I shall have you visit. I shall be glad." He returned to the school on the 2nd of January. He carried in the inside pocket of his coat the deed folded once. He did not show it to Hermione. He did not show it to Ron. He did not show it to Draco. He kept it. It was still in his coat pocket on the evening the goblet had its small green encore in late November of a year that had not yet quite ended. There were, in the days between the second task and the third, a great many small observations the school staff made of the boy at the Slytherin table which they recorded in no formal register, and which they did, on the whole, share with one another in the staff room after supper. Professor McGonagall observed that the boy in her Transfiguration class had stopped, 4 weeks before the third task, performing the exercises she set. She had not, on first noting it, found this disrespectful. She had asked him after class why he had stopped, and the boy had replied that he had completed the syllabus for the year in week 6 and that he had not, until she suggested it, considered that she might be expecting him to perform the exercises a second time, and that he would, with her permission, return to the exercises from the beginning. She had, with the smallest possible adjustment of muscle around the mouth, given the permission, and had reported the conversation to the headmaster in the staff room with the air of a woman who had not, in 41 years of teaching, met the type of student in question and was now meeting it, and was deciding in her own time whether the meeting was a pleasure. Professor Flitwick observed that the boy could perform every charm on the 4th-year syllabus, including 3 that were not in fact on the syllabus, and were, properly speaking, Newt level with his offhand, without speaking and without looking. He observed this with a small benign pleasure. Professor Sprout observed that the boy was, on Wednesdays in the greenhouses, on a first-name basis with 3 of the more notorious plants in Greenhouse 7, and that the plants, on the whole, behaved themselves in his vicinity in a way they had not, since her own student days, behaved. Madame Pomfrey observed that the boy had not, in 3.5 years at the school, set foot in the hospital wing, and that the few injuries he had sustained at Quidditch in his 2nd year, when he had played briefly for Slytherin until Klaus had written a short polite letter to the headmaster suggesting that the boy not, on the whole, play Quidditch any longer, had healed on the same evening as their occurrence, in a manner she had not, in her notes, attempted to explain. These small observations were not, in any formal way, collected, but they were, in their accumulation, the staff room's way of preparing itself for the boys' eventual graduation, which they all assumed would not, on the whole, be on the same calendar as the rest of his year. The third task was in late June. It was the maze. The maze had been built in the Quidditch pitch out of hedges 30 feet high and a great many enchantments. And the maze was, in places, less of a maze than a small private theater in which the maze became, for each champion, a thing they specifically did not wish to see. In Harry's case, the maze attempted 4 turns in to become a cupboard under the stairs, and Harry, who had not in 9 years seen a cupboard under the stairs in any form, looked at it with the level gray-green attention for 2 seconds and walked through it. The hedge closed behind him. The cupboard, finding itself walked through, did not reform. 6 turns in, he heard a cry. The cry was Cedric's. He found Cedric on his knees with a blast-ended Scroot on his shoulder. Harry, who did not on principle leave a young man of 17 who had agreed at the antechamber to not allow another young man to be hurt at the tasks on his knees with a blast-ended Scroot on his shoulder, removed the Scroot with the bone-handled knife Call had given him on his 6th birthday, which he had been carrying inside his coat for 8 years. The Scroot removed did not return. "You did not have to," Cedric said. "I had a principle." "All right." Cedric got up. He looked at Harry. He held out his hand. Together then, together they went on. They reached the center of the maze at the same moment, with the cup glowing on its plinth in the small green circle that the hedges had grown into a kind of chapel. They looked at each other, they looked at the cup. "Together," Cedric said, "together." They reached, they each put a hand on the cup. The cup was a portkey. It had been a portkey since June. The thing that had been arranged in the goblet 4 months before had not, in any of its many small steps, been a thing that Harry had been able to fully account for, nor a thing that his father in the visitor's box at the 3 tasks with his thumb on his cuticle had been able to fully account for either, nor a thing that Elijah in his chair beside Klaus had been able to fully account for, although he had with each task narrowed the account. The cup pulled. Cedric and Harry, with their hands still on the cup, with their faces still in the green chapel of the maze at the heart of the Quidditch pitch, were not in the maze. They were on a hill under a sky, on stones, in dirt, in a graveyard. In the graveyard was a man in a dark cloak with a small bundle in his arms. In the bundle was a thing the size and shape of a baby that should not in any meaningful sense have been the size and shape of a baby. The man in the cloak looked up. The man in the cloak was, on a long second look, Peter Pettigrew. The thing in the bundle did not have a face yet, but its voice carried. "Kill the spare," it said. The man in the cloak raised a wand. Harry moved. Harry moved at the speed Klaus had been teaching him for 9 years. He was in front of Cedric. The killing curse, which had been intended for Cedric, met not a Cedric but a small dark-haired boy whose grandmother on no proven side had given him, through his father's blood, an immunity to the killing curse on the 3rd day of his 9th year that Klaus had not yet in 5 years found cause to disclose. The curse hit. It hit Harry in the chest. It did to Harry's chest what it had done to a great many chests in a great many graveyards in a great many decades. It went off. Harry, on the second look, was still standing. Pettigrew, who had not been the kind of man who is good at improvisation since he had been a boy, blinked. He raised his wand again. He looked at the bundle. The bundle in his other arm said, "Take the boy, bind him, he shall be of use." Harry, with the speed Klaus had taught him, was at Pettigrew. The bone-handled knife was at Pettigrew's throat. Pettigrew, who had handled, in his time, many forms of fear, but had not in any precision handled the form of fear represented by a small dark-haired boy at his throat in a graveyard at midnight, dropped the bundle. The bundle hit the dirt with a small wet thump. It rolled. It rolled into the foot of the cauldron at the center of the headstones. The cauldron, which had been already prepared by the man in the cloak with the bone of the father and the flesh of the servant, and which now had, in the bottom, the bundle of the thing that was to be reborn, hissed. The thing in the cauldron began to rise. Harry, with Pettigrew's pulse under his blade, with Cedric at his back, with the cauldron behind him hissing and rising, did a thing that Davina had taught him, on the gallery of the compound on a quiet morning in the previous July. He had been told that he was not to use the thing except in extremis. He had been told that the thing was a calling, the calling of a name, and that the name, when called in the manner Davina had taught him, would carry across an ocean, and that the family at the other end of the ocean would, in the calling, hear it and come. He called by name. He called Klaus first because Klaus was his father. He called Elijah second. He called Rebecca third. He called Call fourth. He used 4 syllables. Each of the syllables left a small mark on the cuticle of his thumb that would not in the years ahead fade. He set Pettigrew unconscious on the dirt. He turned. He looked at the cauldron. The thing in the cauldron was nearly entirely risen. The thing was, on this second look, the size and shape of a thin, tall man with red eyes and a flat nose. The thing stepped out of the cauldron. Voldemort, in dirt and steam, stood under the headstones in the small graveyard at Little Hangleton and looked at the small dark-haired boy who had once, in a different cottage on a different night, been the cause of his temporary unmaking, and laughed once, a sound that was the sound a man makes who has been waiting 14 years to laugh and has not in the waiting quite remembered how. Boy, Voldemort said. He spoke in a voice that was imperious, sibilant in the way Harry's father had warned him it would be. Come, no, Harry said. You came once, you shall come again. There is no one to call. There is no one who shall arrive in time. There is not, boy, there is. Behind him, at the perimeter of the graveyard, 14 figures had begun very slowly to step into the light of the small green moon. The 14 figures were Death Eaters. They wore masks. They wore black. They wore, against the November cold of the November graveyard in June, long coats. They came to a stop in a circle around the cauldron, and the small dark-haired boy and the unconscious Pettigrew and the Hufflepuff prefect on his feet at the boy's back with his wand raised and his jaw set. You see, Voldemort said, there is no one. There is, Harry said again. In the direction of the west on the wind, the boy heard very faintly the sound of 4 shoes on stone. He smiled. He did not smile in the manner he had begun on his 8th birthday to permit himself to smile when he wished to be merciful. He smiled in the manner Klaus had begun to smile when, on the gallery of the compound in the small, careful lamplight, he had decided that someone was about to learn a lesson which they had been requiring for a long time. There is, my lord, Harry said. They are here. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, The Clearing. It is necessary in any account of that night to step back for a moment to the box in the stands at the Quidditch pitch at Hogwarts, 2 minutes after the cup had taken the 2 boys out of the maze. Klaus had been in his seat. Klaus had been watching, as he had watched at the dragon and as he had watched at the lake, with the particular attention of a man who had agreed in advance to make no improper intervention. His thumb had been at his cuticle. His other hand had been laid on the rail in front of him in the configuration he had begun to use when not committed to violence. The first he knew was Rebecca's hand on his wrist. Nick. Yes, he has called. I have not heard it. He has called me Nick, the syllable he had from Davina. He has used my name. Klaus rose. He rose before the spectators in the stands had begun to be told that the cup had been retrieved and that the 2 boys would, in a moment, be at the gate to receive their applause. He rose because his sister's hand was on his wrist, and her voice had said the word called in a way she had not, in 900 years, used it. Elijah, on his other side, rose at the same instant. Call, beyond Rebecca, rose half a beat later. The 4 of them rose in a way that, to the witch from Beauxbatons who was seated 2 rows behind, looked like 4 still figures in an oil painting who had, in a moment shared between them, decided to be a different oil painting. Davina had been 6.5 hours from the call when she set, in the kitchen on Royal Street, the 4 small charms she had been making over the previous 9 months in a row on the table. Each charm was a small disc of bone the size of a fingernail, marked with a single sigil. She had pricked her thumb, she had pressed her thumb to each disc in turn. The 4 discs on the table had glowed faintly. She had said into the empty kitchen, go, and the 4 discs had not been on the table any longer. They had been in the 4 coat pockets of the 4 people in the stands at the Quidditch pitch at Hogwarts, 3,000 miles away where they belonged and had been since the morning of the first task. Klaus put his hand in his coat pocket. He found the disc. He closed his hand around it. Brother, he said. Yes, Elijah said. Sister. I am ready. Call, I am ready. Boots. Boots, they agreed. In the stands at Hogwarts, with the announcer beginning to inform the crowd that there was, by all reports, a small irregularity with the cup, the 4 figures in the box raised their right hands, with the 4 small discs of bone in their right palms, and they pressed the discs into the air in front of them. The air around them shimmered. The air around them, for 1/4 of a second, was no longer the air of a June evening at a Quidditch pitch in Scotland. It was the air of a graveyard at midnight in early summer in a small village in the West Country of England. They were not, then, in the box. They were in the graveyard. They had been there for 1 second. There were 14 Death Eaters in a circle. There was a thin, tall man with red eyes who had not yet, on his 2nd day of having a body, completely relearned how to use it. There was an unconscious Pettigrew on the dirt. There was a Hufflepuff prefect with his wand raised and his jaw set. And there was, at the center of the small circle, a small dark-haired boy of 14 with the green sigils of his grandmother on his forehead, who had been in his entire life only ever called for once, and had been answered on the call by the only 4 people in the world he had been raised since the cupboard in Surrey to trust. Klaus turned in the dirt very slowly to the thin, tall man. You shall introduce yourself, my lord. The thin, tall man had, in the moment between the second of the family's arrival and the next second, attempted to perform a curse. The curse between Klaus's left hand and the air it had been crossing had become a small light, and the small light had gone out. The thin, tall man had not, in any of his 68 years of practice with curses, seen this happen before, and was, for the first time in his second life, briefly silent. I am the thin tall man said, recovering. Lord Voldemort, you shall— Yes, I had heard. Niklaus of the family at New Orleans. This is my sister Rebecca. This is my brother Elijah. This is my brother Call. We have come for our son. You shall in a moment return him to us. There shall be before that moment a small number of things attended to. We shall be brief. Pay attention. Voldemort, with the sense of a man for whom the conversation had taken a turn he had not in his preparation accounted for, raised his wand. Voldemort did not in any meaningful sense finish the gesture. Elijah was at Voldemort's left. Call was at the back of the circle. Rebecca was in the front of it. What followed in the small graveyard of Little Hangleton, in the period between 12 and 10 minutes past 12, was a thing that the Hufflepuff prefect, with his jaw set, would, in the years he had remaining, refuse to put into words on 3 separate occasions to 3 separate kinds of asking, including under oath at a small private inquiry at the ministry, including in his own diary, including to the woman he later married, and on whose pillow he ought perhaps to have laid the words. He kept them, he never wrote them down, he could not bring himself to. The thing he had seen in a country he had imagined he understood had been a thing that had not, in his small Hufflepuff catechism of how the world was fitted. It was mostly dark. The graveyard was dark to begin with. The figures in long coats were dark. The black robes of the Death Eaters were dark. But there were, in the dark, small bright punctuations. The green of a curse briefly going off, the silver of Call's grin briefly in his face, the long red sweep of Rebecca's hair as she turned with the heel of her boot, the chin of a man she had been waiting 9 seconds to introduce her boot to. There were sounds. The sounds were on the whole not the sounds of men in robes fighting. They were the sounds of cloth and snapping. The cloth was the cloth of long coats moving. The snapping was the snapping of cervical vertebrae. The cervical vertebrae belonged in succession to 14 men, in the part of the graveyard that was not, for the moment, occupied by Death Eaters in the process of being snapped. Klaus and Voldemort were having, in the manner of 2 men in the center of a room, a conversation. I have not, Voldemort said, in fact, heard of you. You have not. You are not, I assume, a wizard. I am not, on the whole. You are a vampire. I am, in part. There has not been a vampire in the British Isles who has dared cross my path. Number. And yet you are here. I am, my lord, here because the boy has called. The boy may call. The boy is my son. We are a family. We come on a call to the place we are called. We have done this for 9 centuries. I shall, when this is concluded, see to it that you do not do it for a 10th. Klaus smiled. It was the smile he had smiled at his father in the old town square 18 months before. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man, of a wolf of the night, who had been told a great many times in his long life that he would not, in some specific particular, do the thing he had been doing for ages, and who had in every case continued to do the thing. You shall not, my lord, you shall not, for 2 reasons. The first is that you are 100 years old. I am older than the cathedral at Canterbury. We are not in the same weight class. The second is that you have in your time performed an action against the soul which our line considers on the whole ill-mannered. Elijah. Elijah, having snapped the last of the 4 Death Eaters allocated to him, was at his brother's elbow without seeming to have crossed the dirt. He held in his hand a small piece of parchment of his own making. The parchment had on it in his hand, in the careful penstroke of a man who had been alive long enough to have studied calligraphy under 3 masters, 5 small ink marks, 5 sigils. Each sigil corresponded very precisely to one of the 5 remaining fragments of the soul of the thin tall man at the center of the graveyard. I have them, brother. I have had them, in fact, for 3 days. I was waiting for the boy's call. Show me. Elijah held out the parchment. Klaus glanced. Klaus said, the diadem, the locket, the cup, the diary. He paused. He looked at the last sigil. The serpent. Yes, and the boy. Yes, brother, there is a small fragment in the boy. We shall address it at home, by Davina, with the boy's full consent and at the boy's leisure. It is not an emergency. It has been quiet in him for a great many years and shall, on this date, not be required to be quiet for much longer. Klaus looked at his son on the dirt with the bone-handled knife in his hand. The boy met his eye. The boy nodded once. Klaus turned then back to Voldemort. I shall, he said, take a moment of your time, my lord, to perform the gestures my brother requires of me. The first. He moved. He moved at the speed he had been moving for 9 centuries. He was at Voldemort. His hand was at Voldemort's chest. The wand the thin tall man had raised did not in the gesture become any kind of impediment because the wand had been knocked, by Klaus's other hand, into the dirt. Klaus did not then do to the thin tall man what he had done to other thin tall men in other places. He did the thing his brother had been studying for 3 days. He set with the inside of his palm against the breastbone a kind of seal. The seal was a sigil of Elijah's making. The sigil told the body, in a tongue the body could not refuse to listen to be, for the next 14 minutes, only a body and not the housing for any other thing. Voldemort, with the sigil sealed into his chest, was suddenly very nearly silent. Elijah at the perimeter of the graveyard lifted his hand. He turned it once in the manner one might turn a key. In the four cardinal directions, to the north of him at Hogwarts in the Room of Requirement, to the south of him in a cave on a coast in the west, to the east of him in a vault below the streets of London, to himself in the dirt at Little Hangleton, four objects, which had been until that turn four containers of four fragments of a thin tall man's soul, ceased to be containers. The diadem on its plinth in the Room of Requirement caught fire in the small green flame. Davina had primed it within March. The locket in the cave at the foot of the stair Sirius Black's brother had taken 3 years to find caught fire similarly. The cup in the vault below the streets of London caught fire similarly. The diary in Elijah's coat pocket, where it had been since the 2nd of July, caught fire and was, by the time he set it on the dirt, a small ash on the page of an old schoolbook. That was 4. The 5th was the serpent. Call at the perimeter raised his hand. Call was holding by the back of the neck a very large snake which had been crossing the wet grass of the graveyard 10 seconds earlier in the direction of Klaus's left ankle, and which had not made the ankle because Call's hand had been faster. The snake in Call's hand was indignant. Call smiled at the snake. Call said to Klaus conversationally, "Brother, yes, permission. Granted." Call, with the easy precision of a man who had been killing snakes since the 17th century, did with his free hand to the snake's spine a thing the snake's spine could not after recover from. The snake in Call's hand was after no longer the snake. That was 5. Klaus turned then finally to the thin tall man at the cauldron. "You are," Klaus said, in the same conversational tone with which he had addressed the boy in the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive 8.5 years before, "the last of your fragments." The thin tall man stared at him. The thin tall man knew, in the second between Klaus's sentence and what followed, that there was no longer in him any of the small private reservoirs by which he had been able in 1981 to escape the cottage in Godric's Hollow. There were no more Horcruxes. There was only the body, and the body had on it a sigil that prevented it from housing any other thing. He raised his wand. Klaus did not this time knock the wand away. He let the curse leave the wand. He stepped with the small careful sidestep his sister had been teaching him since the 16th century out of the curse's path. He brought with his other hand, the same hand that had been at Voldemort's chest, up to Voldemort's throat. He held it there. He did not immediately close. "Father." Klaus did not turn his head. "Father." It was the boy. Klaus did not turn his head. He kept his hand at Voldemort's throat. He said, "Yes, son, the body is what they shall find. Yes, the wraith shall not." "No, son." "Then do it, father." Klaus did it. He did not on that night perform the gesture he had performed at the conductor on the train in Stuttgart, or the gesture he had performed at the man of the house in the lounge at Privet Drive, or any of a number of similar gestures by which a number of similar men had, in his long life, met the end of their accounts. He performed on this gesture a thing he had not performed in some centuries. He drew his hand, with the patient unhurry of a vampire who had been alive long enough to make any gesture last as long as the gesture required, into Voldemort's chest, and through Voldemort's chest, and out the other side. The thing that came out was not, properly speaking, a heart. There was in fact no longer a heart in the body. What came out was a small black thing which had on it a single small unsmiling face. The thing in Klaus's hand twisted. Klaus did not look at the thing. Klaus held the thing for half a second and looked instead at his son. He said, "Watch, love, it is brief." The boy watched. Klaus closed his fist. There was a small sound, the sound of a moth being put out by a soft palm. The thing was, after, not a wraith in his hand, or in the air over the graveyard, or in any of the small private places. It had spent the previous 14 years hiding from the consequence of its own choices. It was an absence. It was a thing which had been, for a great many years, and was, on that exact second of that exact night in that exact graveyard in Little Hangleton in June, no longer. Voldemort's body in the dirt of the graveyard, with no soul left in it and no remaining fragments anywhere in the islands, fell. It fell the way a coat falls when its hanger has been removed. There was in the graveyard after a quiet. The quiet had in it the small wet wind that comes up in graveyards at midnight in early summer in the west country of England, and the fainter wind of 14 long coats settling on their wearers as the 4 people in them turned in their own time to look at the small dark-haired boy who had called them. Rebecca crossed the dirt first. She crossed in pearls, in a coat the color of mourning that no other coat in the graveyard could have been worn well enough to forgive. She went to one knee on the dirt in front of the boy. She put her hand under his small chin. She looked at his face for a count of 3. She did not, in the count of 3, ask him whether he was hurt. She did not need to. She had been in his weekly post for 5 years and his quarterly errata for 4, and his head on her shoulder at the bottom of various stairs at the compound for 9. "Little ghost." "Yes, aunt, you called, I called, we came, you came, we shall always." She did not, on the gallery at the compound or anywhere else for the rest of her long life, use the two words she had been raised by her mother to say at this exact emotional pitch. She had used them in her life with two people. She had not in 9 centuries given them away. She put her hand on her nephew's cheek instead. The two words she did not say were a discipline, and Klaus at her back knew the discipline and laid a hand on the back of her shoulder for 1 second in respect of it. Klaus crossed the dirt last. He went then to one knee in front of his son. He took the boy's small chin in his hand. Son, father, are you whole? I am. Look at me. The boy looked at him. You are whole. Yes, you shall come home. Yes, Cedric Diggory shall come with us as far as the gate at the school. Yes. There is at home a piece of you we shall at your leisure address. It is not an emergency. Yes, father, there is a piece of you also that is mine. Yes, father, you are mine. Yes, father. He gathered his son by the back of the neck against his coat, and the small dark head went down onto his shoulder in the way the small dark head had once gone down onto his shoulder on a Concorde over the Atlantic in December of 1986. And Klaus, in the dirt of the graveyard at Little Hangleton in the small wet wind of midnight, stood in his long charcoal coat with his son against his coat, for the count of 15 that Elijah had 8.5 years before. Stood in the corridor outside a kitchen in Knightsbridge. When he set his son down, the boy was in some particular small way that the boy himself would not be able to name on the gallery the following week different. Cedric Diggory was at his elbow. Cedric Diggory had been at his elbow, in fact, for the previous several minutes, having declined in the manner of his school to go anywhere until the situation had clarified itself. He cleared his throat. Mr. Mikaelson, you are Cedric Diggory. Yes, Harry has told me of you. You agreed in the antechamber on the night of the goblet not to allow my son to be hurt at the tasks. Yes, sir. You have on the whole held to that agreement. We shall not forget. You are welcome at our house. You shall not with respect mention the events of this night to your parents in writing or to the ministry under oath. The body your aunt shall manage. The cup you shall return with on a fresh portkey my brother Elijah shall arrange in 12 minutes. The school shall be informed only that the cup malfunctioned and that the two of you were briefly diverted to an inactive location. The diversion shall be a thing the school accepts. We are agreed. Yes, sir. Good. Elijah arranged the portkeys. Rebecca, having dispensed with the Death Eaters in the manner she preferred, supervised the disposition of the body of the thin, tall man with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had done this kind of thing for kings of greater pedigree, although fewer fragments. Call, having dispensed with the snake, set fire, with a small wooden match from his coat pocket, to the cauldron, to the small bones of the father, to the small dish of the flesh of the servant, and to Peter Pettigrew, who had been, in any case, on his knees for the entire performance and would not, on waking, have been able to give any meaningful account of it. By 12:30 a boy with a tournament cup in his hand and a Hufflepuff prefect in a yellow scarf were standing at the gate of Hogwarts in front of a school which had, in the previous 40 minutes, become quietly hysterical, and which received them on sight with the kind of relief that schools reserve for boys whose absences have been short. By 1 in the morning, a long charcoal coat was at the foot of the West Tower drinking a quiet glass of red wine with the headmaster, who had not asked any questions and would, on the whole, not ask any. By 2, a small dark-haired boy was asleep in his dormitory bed with the cup on the floor beside him and a portrait of him at 11 on his bedside easel. And the portrait had, on its small painted face, the smallest possible adjustment of muscle around the mouth, of a kind he himself had, since his 8th birthday, only on occasion permitted himself. By dawn the body was on a stone at a ministry mortuary in London, and the small private inquiry that would, in the years ahead, attempt to put together what had happened at Little Hangleton would, on the whole, settle on a phrase that the ministry's own internal documents had been settling on for 40 years. A matter by treaty not within our remit, and would, on the same morning, in 3 separate corridors of Whitehall, be filed by 3 undersecretaries who set down their teacups very carefully. There were certain matters that had to be attended to after Little Hangleton in the days and weeks that followed, and the family attended to them with the brisk, uninterested efficiency of people who had been attending to such matters for 10 centuries. The body of the thin, tall man on the stone at the ministry mortuary in London was identified with a degree of reluctance by an Auror of the 1st Division named Kingsley Shacklebolt. The identification was filed. The file was sealed. The file sealing was in due course queried in the corridors of Whitehall, and the query was met by the same phrase in 3 corridors of 3 undersecretariats that had met all previous queries on this particular topic. A matter by treaty not within our remit. The file remained sealed. The 14 Death Eaters were in 3 cases returned to their families. With apologies in 11 cases, their families had moved abroad in the 72 hours after the news. and their disposition had been managed elsewhere by Davina, in a way that Davina had not described to Klaus in detail, and that Klaus on the gallery at Royal Street in his usual hour of the afternoon had not on the whole required to have described. He had set the cup down. He had nodded once. He had said, "Thank you, Davina," and Davina, who had been, for the 8.5 years between the cupboard in Surrey and the dirt in Little Hangleton, a great many things to a great many people in the household, had said only, "I am paid, Nick," and had gone in. The piece of the thin, tall man that had, since the year of the cupboard, been resident, very quietly, in the small green sigils on Harry's forehead was removed by Davina in the kitchen at the compound on the morning of the 5th of July, with Klaus on a chair at the boy's left, and Rebecca on a chair at the boy's right, and a fresh draught of his father's blood in the boy's hand. The procedure took 11 minutes. It did not, on the whole, hurt. Davina was a good witch. The piece, when removed, was set by Davina into a small ceramic dish, and the dish by Klaus was carried out into the courtyard, and the dish by Klaus was emptied into the fountain. The fountain, which had been holding its breath for a generation when Klaus had opened the iron gate 8.5 years before, took the small piece into itself, and was after the same fountain it had been, only with the bronze figure of the woman with the fish in one hand and the star in the other, looking a little, in the right light, less weary than she had been the morning before. Harry, in the kitchen after, was given a small dish of beignets. He ate them slowly. He did not, on the whole, look different. He did, in the very level grey-green attention with which he ate them, look as he had looked on the second morning of his life at the compound, when he had held up his empty plate for more. Cedric Diggory came to the compound in late July with his father, Amos Diggory, who had been a Middleville official at the Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and who, on his return from New Orleans, became, within a fortnight, a slightly more senior official with a slightly more interesting brief. Cedric, in the courtyard, was given by Rebecca a small dance lesson he had not requested, and by Call a small instructive afternoon on the Pontchartrain that he would, in the years ahead, remember with mixed feelings, and by Elijah a single quiet conversation in the library on the subject of what was and what was not, in a long life, worth keeping. Cedric returned to England in the second week of August, married in the following year the girl whose name had been waiting for him for some time, and lived, on the whole, well into the next century. Hermione Granger received, in the second week of August, a letter from Davina of New Orleans, written in Davina's careful slanting hand on the family stationery, which contained, in 11 numbered paragraphs, the answers to 11 of the questions Hermione had been writing into the back of her diary for 3.5 years. She read it in her parents' kitchen in Hampstead 3 times. She did not show it to her parents. She did not show it for the rest of her life to anyone else, although she did, in her 82nd year, transcribe paragraph 7, with permission, into her own published memoir, under the section called Friends I Had the Good Fortune to Make. Ron Weasley, who had been, in his way, the friend at the platform on the first morning, was given by Klaus, in the second week of August, a small package containing a fine wool waistcoat and a short note that read, "You shall, when next you wish to dine at the Slytherin table, do so with my full approval." Niklaus and Ron, in his mother's kitchen, on reading it, sat down for a count of 3 on the bench by the door, and his mother, who had been making bread, looked at him for the count and decided not to ask, and Ron, on his feet again, put the waistcoat on, and wore it for the rest of the summer on every Sunday. Draco Malfoy did not, in any of the years after Little Hangleton, refer to the events of that night out loud. He referred to them exactly once in a letter to Harry in October of 1995, in which he expressed, in his own neat backslanted hand, gratitude for an event he could not, in writing, name, and Harry, who had been in the dining room at the compound on the morning the letter arrived, read it, set it aside, and wrote back in his own neat hand a reply consisting of 3 sentences. The reply was kept by Draco in the inside pocket of a coat for the rest of his life. He did not, on the whole, tell anyone what it had said. The reply was, "Draco, you are welcome. We are a household and you are, by long practice in it, come for Christmas." H. Mickle in the East, in the City of Old Hospitals, in the second week of August, received word by a route he had spent 18 months arranging of the events at Little Hangleton, and considered with the same 900-year patience that had brought him to the old town square in Prague, the matter of what he proposed to do next. He decided, in the way he had decided in Prague, that he would not this year come west. He decided, in fact, that he would not, until the boy was an older boy than the boy now was, attempt the gesture again. The decision was filed in Mickle's small dark mind, alongside a great many other patient decisions of his long life, and the decision would be revisited in time. But not on the calendar Klaus had been calculating against. Not by a long way. The boy had grown, the boy had called, the boy's 4 had come. The boy's grandfather in the city of old hospitals with his wrist in the cold water was learning for the first time that there were things in the world older than his hunting. And on the gallery of the compound at Royal Street, on the second Sunday in August, in the small soft warm of a late summer evening, Klaus stood at the rail with his son at his elbow, and they did not between them speak for half an hour. The river ran. The mockingbird who had been gone for 2 summers was back, on a different branch of a different tree, with a slightly different repertoire that he had picked up in his absence and that he had decided on the whole suited his voice better than the old one. Davina in the kitchen was making, with Rebecca's help, a small dish of beignets, although it was a Sunday on which Harry had not, on the whole, asked. "Father." "Yes, son. I shall in the end build the house. I know, it shall not have a cupboard in it. I know you shall visit it. I shall, often, often," the river ran, the mockingbird sang. The fountain in the courtyard below them moved in its small steady way, water from itself into itself, and the bronze figure of the woman with the fish and the star, by some light Davina had set on her on the morning of the 5th of July, was looking out faintly at the iron gate that had been open for the boy at the rail for 9.5 years. "Sleep well, little wolf," Klaus said very softly. "Sleep well, father." The boy went in. Klaus stayed at the rail a while longer. He had not, in the end, named the thing he had felt on the second night of his son's life at the compound, when he had stood in the doorway and watched the small chest rise and fall under the quilt. He had not, in the 8.5 years between that night and this one, named it. He did not, on this particular Sunday evening, in the soft summer warm, name it either. He was not a man who named what he felt, and he intended to keep in this one small matter the discipline of 9.5 centuries. He let the thing stand there in the dark of him in its own shape. The thing in the dark of him was a very old thing, and it had a small new shape, and the new shape was a boy's. Chapter 6 End.